Dear listeners, this channel publishes only full and exclusive audio stories. Please subscribe and like them if you enjoy them.
Chapter 1: The First Conversation. The first time Clara met him, the rain had already softened the city into reflections. It was one of those quiet evenings when the streets seemed to forget their own noise. Cars passed slowly through the wet darkness, their headlights stretching in long pale lines across the pavement. The windows of cafes glowed like small rooms inside a dream, and people moved beneath umbrellas with their shoulders slightly raised, as if the rain had given them permission to be gentle with one another. Clara had not planned to stop anywhere. She had meant to go straight home after work, make tea, change into soft clothes, and let the evening disappear without asking anything of her. But the rain had begun suddenly, with a heavy whisper against the glass doors of the gallery where she worked, and she had stood beneath the awning for several minutes, watching the water gather along the curb. That was when she noticed the bookshop across the street. Its windows were warm. Not bright, not inviting in a cheerful way, but warm, like a lamp left on for someone who had not yet returned. A narrow sign above the door read Mercer and Vale Books, though Clara had passed that street many times and had never noticed it before. She crossed when the traffic light changed, holding her coat closed at her throat. A bell chimed softly as she entered. Inside, the shop smelled of paper, rain, and old wood. Shelves leaned close together in patient rows. A green-shaded lamp glowed on the counter. Somewhere near the back, quiet piano music played so softly that Clara could not tell whether it came from a speaker or from another room. She brushed raindrops from her sleeves and moved without purpose through the aisles. She liked places like this. Places where no one expected her to perform a mood. At the gallery, she spent her days speaking in measured tones about paintings, guiding visitors through color and silence, explaining what could not truly be explained. By evening, she often felt emptied of words. Here, no one asked her anything. At least, not at first. She found herself near a shelf marked essays and letters, tracing the spines without reading them. Then a book slipped from the shelf beside her and landed softly at her feet. Clara looked down. It had not fallen from where her hand had been. It had dropped from the shelf just beyond her reach, as if someone had pushed it lightly from the other side. She bent to pick it up at the same time as another hand reached for it. Their fingers did not touch. Almost, but not quite. "Oh," she said, stepping back. The man beside her smiled as if he had already forgiven her for something she had not done. "I'm sorry," he said. "That was my fault." His voice was low, calm, and careful. Not overly polished. Not dramatic. Just gentle enough to make the narrow aisle feel less narrow. Clara glanced at the book in his hand. The cover was dark blue, worn at the corners. "Were you hiding behind the shelf and pushing books at strangers?" she asked. His smile deepened, but quietly. "Only when I think they might need one." It was the kind of answer that should have sounded too charming. Maybe, from someone else, it would have. But he said it simply, with no visible effort to impress her. Clara looked at him properly then. He was tall, though not in a way that demanded attention. His coat was dark and rain-speckled at the shoulders. His hair, brown and slightly damp, curved naturally near his temples. His face was calm, almost unusually calm, but not blank. His eyes were gray or green. In the warm bookshop light, she could not decide. "What makes you think I need that one?" she asked. He turned the book over, reading the title as if checking his own instinct. "Letters from Quiet Rooms," he said. Because you came in from the rain and went straight to the shelf where people look when they don't want a story, but still want company. Clara held his gaze. It was too accurate. Not impossible. Not strange enough to unsettle her. Anyone observant might have guessed something similar. She was still wearing her gallery badge. She had passed the fiction tables without slowing. She had been standing in front of essays and letters for longer than someone searching for a specific title. Still, she felt the small pause that happens inside the body when a stranger sees more than expected. That sounds like something from the back of a book, she said. It might be, he replied. I read too many of them. He offered the book to her. She took it, mostly because refusing would have made the moment heavier than it needed to be. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. He did not continue speaking. That surprised her. Men who opened conversations in quiet bookshops usually wanted to keep them alive. They asked names too quickly. They filled silence with proof of themselves. But this man simply stepped back enough to let her have the aisle again. Clara looked down at the book. The title was unfamiliar. She opened to a random page. A line near the middle caught her eye. Some people arrive like an answer, though no question has been spoken aloud. She closed the book at once. It was too neat. Too perfectly timed. When she looked up, he was browsing the opposite shelf, not watching her. Or at least, not obviously. She should have moved away. Instead, she stayed. Do you work here? She asked. He turned back, as if he had been expecting the question but was not waiting for it. No, he said. I come here when it rains. Only when it rains? Mostly. Why? He looked toward the front window, where water trembled down the glass in uneven lines. Because people choose differently in bad weather, he said. They become more honest about where they want to be. Clara almost smiled. That definitely sounds like the back of a book. This time he laughed, softly. It was a pleasant laugh, brief and warm, and yet something about it ended exactly when it should have. Not too soon. Not too late. I'm Elias, he said. He did not hold out his hand. Clara liked that. Clara. Clara, he repeated, not as a flirtation, but as if placing the name carefully somewhere he would remember it. The shop settled around them. A page turned somewhere in another aisle. Rain tapped the windows. The piano music shifted into a slower melody, barely present. Clara had always trusted the early feeling she had around people. Not judgment, exactly, but atmosphere. Some people made a room feel crowded even when they stood far away. Others made it easier to breathe. Elias, strangely, did both. There was ease in him. A kind of emotional stillness she found rare. He did not lean too close or speak too loudly. He did not rush to explain himself. But beneath that ease was something she could not name, like the faint outline of a door painted the same color as the wall. What do you do when it doesn't rain? She asked. I walk past places like this and pretend I'm too busy to go in. That's very specific. It's unfortunately true. What are you busy with? There was the smallest pause. Not long enough to be meaningful. Only a breath. I restore old recordings, he said. Clara tilted her head. Music? Sometimes music. Sometimes voices. Interviews. Family tapes. Radio archives. Anything people saved because they were afraid it might disappear. She liked that answer. Perhaps too much. It had the quiet melancholy of a profession invented for a novel, and yet it was real enough. Someone had to do that kind of work. Someone had to sit with damaged sound and coax it back from static. That sounds lonely, she said. It can be, he replied. But not always. Sometimes it feels like listening carefully is a way of keeping someone company. Again, the right answer. Not clever. Not showy. Right. Clara noticed it, and then noticed herself noticing it. She turned the book over in her hands, needing something to do. And you? Elias asked. I work at the Halden Gallery. With paintings? Mostly contemporary. Some photography. Do you like it? The question was ordinary. People asked it often. Usually Clara gave the ordinary answer. Yes, very much. Or, it has its days. But something about his tone made her pause. He asked as if he did not need her answer to be graceful. I like the quiet moments, she said. Before opening. After closing. When the rooms are empty and the artwork feels less watched. Elias nodded. Not eagerly. Not with the obvious satisfaction of someone finding common ground. He nodded as if he understood exactly, and that was almost more intimate. Art changes when no one is trying to understand it, he said. Clara looked at him. Yes, she said slowly. It does. A small warmth moved through her, unexpected and unwelcome only because it was so easy. She had not come into the shop to meet anyone. She had not wanted the fragile beginning of interest, with all its little risks and interpretations. Her life was peaceful enough. Not full maybe, but arranged. She had a small apartment with white curtains and plants that survived because she refused to overcare for them. She had a sister who called every Sunday. She had work, books, evening walks, and the steady comfort of not needing to explain herself too often. Yet here was Elias, standing beside a shelf of essays, saying things that landed exactly where they should. The bell over the door chimed as another customer entered. Cold air moved through the shop. Clara glanced toward the window and saw that the rain had grown heavier. You chose a bad evening to walk home, Elias said. I didn't choose it. The weather did. Do you live far? It was the first question that felt slightly personal. Clara did not answer directly. Far enough that I'm considering buying the book just to wait out the rain. A flicker of approval crossed his face, or something like approval. It's worth buying, he said. You've read it? Yes. And? It's uneven, he said. But honest. The third letter is better than the first two. The last one feels unfinished, but maybe in the right way. Clara opened the book again, curious despite herself. You remember the order of the letters? I remember structure more than plot. That sounds useful. Sometimes. Sometimes it ruins things. How? He ran one finger lightly along the shelf beside him, not touching any title long enough to choose it. You start noticing when people repeat themselves, he said. When they return to the same fear with different words. When they leave something out every time. Clara felt the faintest chill, though the shop was warm. That sounds less like reading and more like evidence. Elias turned to her, and his expression softened. I didn't mean it coldly. No, I know. And she did know. Or thought she did. There had been no sharpness in him. No judgment. Still, the sentence remained between them for a moment, thin and clear. When they leave something out every time. Clara wondered what she herself left out. The thought came too suddenly, like a drop of rain slipping beneath a collar. To move away from it, she said, "What do I repeat?" She meant it lightly. Elias did not answer at once. His gaze rested on her face, not in a way that felt invasive, but with an attention so complete it made her aware of her own breathing. "You apologize without saying sorry," he said. Clara blinked. "I do." "Yes." "How?" "You step back before anyone asks you to. You make space quickly. You hold things as if you're ready to return them." She looked down. She was holding the book with both hands, lightly, as if it still belonged to him. For a second, she felt exposed. Then, oddly, comforted. His observation had no cruelty in it. It was simply there, offered without demand. "That's a lot to decide from 10 minutes in a bookshop," she said. "You're right," he said at once. "It may be completely wrong." The answer should have relieved her. Instead, she noticed how perfectly he gave it. No defensiveness. No insistence. He stepped back from his own statement exactly the way she might have needed him to. It was considerate. It was mature. It was also strangely seamless. The shop owner, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned loosely at the back of her head, appeared near the counter and began stacking receipts. The clock behind her showed 7:30. Clara had been inside for almost 20 minutes. It felt like 5. "I should buy this," she said. Elias nodded. "I'll leave you to it." Again, he did not press. That made it harder to go. At the counter, Clara paid for the book while Elias browsed near the travel section. She could see his reflection faintly in the dark window. He was reading the back of a paperback, his head slightly bowed, his posture relaxed. The shop owner wrapped Clara's book in brown paper without being asked. "Good choice," the woman said. "Have you read it?" Clara asked. "Parts of it. People mostly buy it in the rain." Clara looked up. The woman smiled as though this were not a strange thing to say. "Do they?" "Oh yes. Certain books wait for weather." Clara slipped the book into her bag. When she turned, Elias was no longer by the travel section. For one small moment, she thought he had left. A surprising disappointment moved through her. It was gentle but unmistakable. Then she saw him near the door, standing beneath the narrow awning outside, looking at the rain. He had not gone. He was waiting, though not in a way that claimed to be waiting. Clara hesitated. Then she stepped outside. The rain sounded louder under the awning, rushing through the gutter and whispering over the street. The air smelled of wet stone and leaves. Elias glanced at her, then at the sky. "Still choosing honestly," he said. She smiled before she could stop herself. "I suppose I am." "Which direction?" "West." "So am I." She should have been cautious. She was, in the practical corners of her mind. She did not know him. Calm men could still be dangerous. Kindness could be a practiced surface. But the street was open and lit, and the walk was simple. More than that, she wanted to keep speaking with him, and the wanting was quiet enough to seem harmless. They began walking beneath the same line of awnings, not sharing an umbrella because neither of them had one. For the first block, they spoke about ordinary things. The city. The strange beauty of empty buses at night. The way some neighborhoods smelled different after rain. Elias asked questions that did not feel like questions. Clara found herself answering more fully than she intended. She told him about the gallery, about a painter who always arrived before dawn to check how the morning light touched his work. She mentioned her apartment near the old cinema. She spoke of her sister, Nora, who lived 2 hours away and believed every problem could be solved with soup. Elias listened. That was the simplest way to describe it, and yet it was not simple at all. He listened without interrupting, but not passively. He remembered small details within minutes. When she mentioned the old cinema later, he referred to it as the one near your apartment, though she had only said it once. When she laughed about Nora's soup, he asked what kind she made. Lentil, Clara said. Always lentil. Reliable. Relentless. He laughed again, at exactly the right softness. They stopped at a crossing. The traffic light glowed red through the rain. What about you? Clara asked. Do you have relentless family traditions? Elias looked at the wet street ahead. The pause came again. This time, Clara noticed it more clearly. It was not hesitation, exactly. It was more like a page turning inside him before he spoke. Not many, he said. My family wasn't very traditional. That can mean a lot of things. It can. He said it gently, but closed. Clara waited, leaving room for more. Nothing came. The light changed. They crossed. She told herself not to make too much of it. People had private histories. She had no right to expect a stranger to unfold his life during a rainy walk after one conversation in a bookshop. In fact, she respected the boundary. And yet he had entered her inner life so easily, noticing her habits, naming her quietness, asking questions that opened small doors. When she reached one of his, it did not open at all. Not locked loudly. Not guarded with visible force. Just closed. At the next corner, Elias slowed. I turn here, he said. Clara felt the evening thin around them. Oh, she said. I keep going. He looked down the street in her direction, then back at her. It was good to meet you, Clara. The way he said her name was careful again. Warm, but not possessive. You too. There was a brief silence. A car passed, sending water softly against the curb. Somewhere above them, a window opened and then shut. The city seemed to hold its breath in a very small way. Elias reached into his coat pocket and took out a receipt from the bookshop. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a phone number. Clara stared at it. You wrote that already? She asked. His expression did not change much, but something in his eyes shifted. Yes, he said. When? Before you came outside. Why? The question was sharper than she intended, though still quiet. Elias looked at the receipt, then offered it to her without moving closer. Because I hoped I might give it to you, he said. But I didn't want to ask for yours. It was, again, the right answer. Respectful. Gentle. Thoughtful. She took the receipt. Their fingers still did not touch. Good night, Clara, he said. Good night, Elias. He turned down the side street and walked away without looking back. Clara continued west, the receipt folded inside her palm. By the time she reached her apartment, the rain had softened to a mist. The old cinema sign glowed faintly at the end of the block. Her building smelled of dust and laundry soap. She climbed the stairs slowly, aware of the book in her bag and the number in her hand. Inside, she took off her damp coat and hung it near the door. She fed the small lamp beside her sofa with light. The room became familiar around her, the pale rug, the white curtains, the cup left from morning tea, the plants leaning toward the window. Everything was as it had been. Still, something felt slightly altered. Clara placed the wrapped book on the table. Then she unfolded the receipt. His handwriting was precise, but not stiff. Elias Vale. The surname made her pause. Mercer and Vale Books. She stood very still. Perhaps it was coincidence. Vale could be a common enough name. Perhaps he was related to the owner. Perhaps he had not mentioned it because it did not matter. But then she remembered his answer. "Do you work here?" No. Not a lie, necessarily. Only incomplete. Clara sat down slowly, the receipt resting on her knee. Outside, water dripped from the fire escape in steady intervals. The room was quiet except for that sound, and the distant hush of tires on wet roads. She looked at the brown paper package on the table. For a while, she did not touch it. Then, with careful fingers, she unwrapped the book. Inside the front cover, in small faded ink, someone had written a name. E. Vale. Clara stared at it for a long time. There was nothing frightening about it. Nothing dramatic. A man with the same surname as a bookshop had recommended a book that perhaps once belonged to him. A man who liked old recordings and remembered structure more than plot. A man who answered gently and left space and said the right thing almost every time. It was all explainable. Every part of it. And yet, as Clara sat in the soft light of her apartment, listening to the rain loosen its grip on the city, she felt the first delicate thread of unease move through the evening. Not fear. Not even suspicion. Only the quiet sense that something had begun before she knew she was part of it. Chapter 2. Something felt too easy. Clara did not text him the next morning. She told herself this was reasonable. A person did not have to respond to every strange little opening life offered. Some evenings were meant to remain evenings, complete in themselves, softened by rain and made more beautiful because nothing followed them. But the receipt stayed on her kitchen table. By breakfast, she had turned it over 3 times. By noon, she had moved it beneath the book, as if hiding it there could make the choice less visible. At the gallery, she tried to give her attention to the new exhibition. 2 assistants were adjusting the lights in the central room, raising and lowering them by small degrees until the paintings seemed to breathe. Clara stood near the entrance with a clipboard, watching a pale blue canvas change each time the angle shifted. Usually, she liked this part. The slow preparation. The private work behind public stillness. But that day her mind kept returning to the bookshop. Elias Vale. The name in the book. The name on the sign. She could have searched for him online. She almost did during her lunch break, sitting alone in the staff room with a cup of soup warming her hands. Her phone lay face up beside her, dark and patient. She imagined typing his name and finding an answer too quickly. A photograph. A profile. A clear explanation. Instead, she placed the phone in her bag. Some questions lost their shape when answered too soon. That evening, she walked home under a dry sky. The city looked ordinary again, its edges sharper without rain. The bookshop window was dark when she passed it. Closed. The sign above the door looked older in daylight, the gold letters faded at the edges. Mercer and Vale Books. She stopped for only a moment. In the window, a display of weathered books leaned beneath a card that read, Private Collections, Rare Letters, Restored Editions. Restored. The word stayed with her as she continued home. She made tea. She changed into soft clothes. She opened letters from quiet rooms and read the first letter, then the second. Elias had been right. The third was better. By the time she finished it, the room had grown blue with evening. The letter was written by a woman who had moved to a seaside town after the end of a long friendship. It did not explain the friendship. It only circled the absence it had left, describing small things. A second cup set out by mistake, a joke half remembered, the ache of reaching for someone who was no longer there. Clara read one paragraph twice. Then she picked up her phone. She typed, "This is Clara. You were right about the third letter." She looked at the message until the words became unfamiliar. Then she sent it. His reply arrived 4 minutes later. "I'm glad you reached it. The third letter knows what the first two are trying to say." Clara leaned back against the sofa. Again, the sentence landed softly but exactly. She could almost hear his voice inside it. She wrote, "That sounds unfair to the first two." A moment passed. Then, maybe. But sometimes we need to speak around a thing before we can speak toward it. Clara smiled despite herself. She did not know how long they wrote that evening. Time loosened. Their messages were not constant or rushed. They moved with spaces between them, as if both of them were leaving room for breath. He asked what she had noticed in the letter. She answered honestly. He told her he liked the part about the unused cup. She asked why. Because grief often shows itself through objects before people admit it in words, he wrote. She stared at that for a while. Then she wrote, "You make everything sound as if it has been quietly waiting to be understood." His response took longer this time. Not everything. The simplicity of it held her. She wondered what he meant. She wondered if he had meant her to wonder. Before bed, he sent one final message. "Sleep gently, Clara. Leave the last letter for another night." It should have felt too intimate. Maybe it did. But she slept well. The next morning, she woke before her alarm to a pale wash of light on the curtains. For a few seconds she did not remember why she felt different. Then her eyes moved to the book on the table and the memory returned with a warmth that was almost embarrassing. There was no message from him. She appreciated that. Or wanted to appreciate it. He had not turned the conversation into an obligation. He had not pressed into her morning. At work, the exhibition opened quietly. Visitors drifted through the rooms with folded brochures and careful faces. Clara guided a small group through the photography section, speaking about negative space, shadow, and domestic interiors. Her voice was steady. Her mind was mostly present. Still, when her phone vibrated at 3 in the afternoon, she knew before looking. "I passed the gallery today," Elias wrote. "The blue poster in the window suits the building." Clara stood in the corridor behind the front desk, holding the phone. The gallery did have a blue poster in the window. She had helped choose it. "You passed by?" She wrote. "Yes." "You didn't come in?" "No." "Why not?" A pause. "I thought it might be strange to arrive where you work without being invited." Once again, the right answer. Clara looked through the doorway into the main room. A man in a gray scarf was standing too close to a painting. One of the assistants crossed the floor to remind him gently not to touch. Clara wrote, "That was considerate." His reply came quickly. "I hoped so." Something about that answer gave her a small, unexpected feeling. Not discomfort exactly. More like noticing a seam in cloth. "I hoped so." Not "I thought so." Not "I didn't want to intrude." He had hoped his behavior would be received as considerate. There was nothing wrong with that. Everyone hoped to be understood well. Still, Clara read the message twice. That evening, they spoke on the phone. It happened almost accidentally. Clara had texted him a question about the bookshop, intending to keep it light. "Is Vale your family?" His reply came after a longer pause than usual. "It was my mother's name." Clara waited for more. Nothing came. After several minutes, she wrote. The book had E. Vale written inside. This time he called. She let it ring twice before answering. "Hello?" "Clara," he said. "I'm sorry." That probably seemed strange. His voice through the phone was slightly different, closer and less smooth, with a faint thread of tiredness beneath it. "It did," she said. "A little. My mother owned part of the shop years ago." "Not anymore." The current owner kept the name. "And the book?" "It was hers." Clara sat down at the kitchen table. "You recommended me your mother's book?" "I didn't realize it was that copy until later." "You didn't?" "No." She listened to the quiet behind his voice. No traffic, no music, no other person. Just the small electrical closeness of the call. "It fell from the shelf," she said. "I know." "How?" "Because I had just put it back badly." The explanation was simple. Almost disappointingly simple. Clara looked at the book on the table. The brown paper wrapping lay folded beside it. "So you didn't push it toward me from the other side of the shelf?" "No," he said, and she heard the smile in his voice. "Though I wish I had thought of that. It would make me seem more mysterious." "You already seem mysterious enough." There was a pause. "Do I?" The question was quiet. For the first time, he sounded not perfectly steady, but uncertain. Clara softened. "A little. I don't mean to." "I know." And she believed she did. They spoke for nearly an hour. The conversation was easy in a way Clara had not expected. Easier than texting, easier even than the bookshop. Elias did not rush. He did not fill every silence. When Clara paused, he waited. When she changed direction, he followed without making her explain why. She told him about an elderly visitor who came to every exhibition and pretended not to cry in front of abstract paintings. He told her about a recording he had restored of a woman singing to her child in 1962, the tape nearly ruined by water damage. "What happened to them?" Clara asked. "I don't know," Elias said. "Most of the time I only get fragments." "Does that bother you?" "Yes," he said. "But fragments are honest in their own way." She liked him most when he said things like that. She also feared that she liked him because he said things like that. Near the end of the call, Clara asked, "Do you still go to the shop often because of your mother?" There was silence. Not empty silence. Careful silence. "Partly," he said. And partly? Because I know where everything is. The answer was light, but closed again. Clara let it remain closed. When they said goodnight, she felt peaceful. That was the strange thing. Even with the unanswered places in him, even with the odd coincidences, he made her feel emotionally safe. Not excited in a sharp way. Not anxious. Safe. It had been a long time since anyone had done that so quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. The next few days unfolded with the quiet rhythm of something beginning. Elias sent one message in the morning, never too early. Usually something small. A line about the weather. A note about a sound he had heard outside his window. Once, a photograph of a mug beside a stack of tapes, captioned, "The heroic structure holding my day together." Clara found herself looking forward to these small arrivals. She answered when she could. At lunch. Between visitors. On the walk home. He remembered everything. Not just important things. Small things. On Wednesday, she mentioned that one gallery room always felt colder than the others. On Thursday, he asked, "Did the cold room behave today?" On Friday, she wrote that she disliked the smell of lilies because they made every room feel like a formal goodbye. On Sunday morning, he sent a photo from a market stall, no lilies. Only forgiving tulips. It was sweet. It was also precise. Most people forgot details. They remembered the shape of a person, not every thread. Elias seemed to gather all of it. Not in an overwhelming way. Not like someone building a file. More like someone trying not to miss anything. Clara told herself this was what attention looked like. Real attention. Maybe she was only unused to it. On Sunday afternoon, Nora called. Clara was watering the plants when her sister's face appeared on the screen, bright and wind-flushed. "You look suspiciously rested," Nora said. "I'm standing near a window." "No. That's not it. Something happened." "Nothing happened." Nora narrowed her eyes. "That means something almost happened." Clara carried the phone to the sofa and sat down. "I met someone," she said. Nora's expression changed at once, softening with curiosity. "Where?" "In a bookshop." "Of course you did." "It was raining." "Of course it was." Clara laughed. She told Nora some of it. The book. The conversation. The phone calls. Elias's work with old recordings. She did not mention the name inside the book. She did not mention the strange feeling of his answers being too exact. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because speaking it aloud might make it sound either silly or serious, and she did not know which would be worse. "He sounds kind," Nora said. "He is. Do you like him?" Clara looked toward the table, where letters from quiet rooms lay open. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." "You think?" "I do." Nora smiled. That sounded less convincing. "It's new." "New can be nice." "I know." "And scary." "I know that too." Nora leaned closer to the camera. "Does he make you feel like you can be yourself?" Clara did not answer immediately. The obvious answer was yes. Elias listened. He left space. He noticed without pushing. He seemed to accept each part of her before she had fully shown it. But the question settled strangely. Did he make her feel like herself? Or did he make her feel like a version of herself he already understood? I'm still finding out, Clara said. Nora accepted this. After the call, Clara walked to the market. The day was mild, with thin clouds and a soft wind moving through the trees. She bought bread, pears, and a small bunch of tulips because Elias's message had placed them in her mind. They were pale yellow and slightly open, the petals curved like small cups. At home, she put them in a jar near the window. Then she texted him a photo. Forgiving tulips. His answer came a few minutes later. They suit your room. Clara looked around. She had never sent him a photo of her room before. She checked the image. The tulips stood on the windowsill, but behind them the reflection in the glass showed part of the sofa, the pale rug, the white curtains. Enough, perhaps, to guess. Still, her thumb hovered over the screen. How do you know? She wrote. His reply came after a pause. The light looks like you. Clara stared at the words. It was beautiful. Too beautiful, maybe. The kind of thing a person wanted to believe before asking whether it meant anything. She wrote nothing back. A little later, he sent another message. That sounded rehearsed, didn't it? Clara sat very still. The apartment was quiet around her. Outside, a bus sighed at the stop near the corner. She typed. A little. His response came quickly. I'm sorry. I meant it simply. She read the message once. Twice. Then she wrote, I know. But she did not know. That was the first evening she felt the ease between them shift. Not break. Not darken. Only shift, as a sleeping person might turn toward a dream. They met again the next Thursday. Clara chose the place, a small tea room near the river, open late, with low lamps and tables set far enough apart for privacy. She chose it partly because she liked it and partly because it was familiar ground. If Elias felt too unreal in person, she wanted the room to feel real around her. He arrived exactly on time. Not early enough to seem eager. Not late enough to need excuse. When he entered, Clara felt the same quiet warmth she had felt in the bookshop. He saw her and smiled, and something in her body eased before her mind could decide whether to allow it. You came, he said. You sound surprised. Not surprised. Glad. He removed his coat and sat across from her. The lamplight touched one side of his face, leaving the other softly shadowed. He looked a little tired, Clara noticed. There was a faint darkness beneath his eyes. You look tired, she said. I slept badly. Why? He looked down at the menu. Old sound in my head. From work? Yes. What kind? A man trying to remember a poem. Clara waited. Elias continued, the tape kept breaking in the same place. Every time he reached the middle, the sound tore apart. I worked on it too long. That sounds sad. It was. But also tender. He kept beginning again. The server came. They ordered tea. Chamomile for Clara, black tea for Elias. When the cups arrived, steam rose between them like a small veil. For a while, the conversation moved naturally. They spoke of books, work, the river at night. Elias asked about Nora, and Clara told him her sister had once mailed soup in a glass jar despite all common sense. Elias laughed, and this time the laugh lingered a little imperfectly, as if it had surprised him too. Clara liked that. Then, while she was stirring honey into her tea, he said, "You didn't answer the tulip message." Her spoon touched the side of the cup. A small sound. "No," she said. "Was it too much?" She looked at him. There it was again. The carefulness. The emotional accuracy. He had not accused her of silence. He had not pretended not to notice. He had named the exact place where the air had changed. "It was just very fitting," she said. "Fitting can be uncomfortable." "Yes. I do that sometimes," he said. "What?" "Say things that fit too closely." Clara's hand stilled. The tea room hummed softly around them. A couple near the window murmured over a shared dessert. Rain had not returned, but the river beyond the glass moved darkly under the lamps. "Why do you think that is?" she asked. Elias looked at his cup. For once, he did not answer quickly. "I learned to pay attention," he said finally. "That sounds like only part of the answer." "It is." She waited. He smiled faintly, but it did not reach his eyes. "I'm not trying to be evasive." "You are a little." "I know." The honesty disarmed her. He looked up. "There are things I don't talk about easily." "Not because they're dramatic." "They aren't. I just don't always know how to tell a story in the right order." Clara felt something inside her soften and tighten at the same time. "You restore other people's fragments," she said, "but you don't know what to do with your own." His eyes changed. For a moment, he looked genuinely seen. "Yes," he said. "That." The word was almost a whisper. Clara believed him. And because she believed him, she let the discomfort rest. After tea, they walked along the river. The night was cool and clear. Lamps trembled in the water. Their steps matched without effort. At one point, Clara slipped slightly on a damp stone. Elias reached out, not to grab her, but to offer his hand near enough for her to take. She took it. His hand was warm. That surprised her. She did not know why. Perhaps some quiet part of her had expected him to feel like the rest of him seemed, calm, distant, almost made of thought. But his hand was human. Warm, slightly rough at the fingertips. They walked that way for several minutes. Neither of them commented on it. When they reached the bridge, Clara stopped to look at the water. Elias stood beside her, still holding her hand lightly, as if it were something entrusted to him rather than something taken. "This feels easy," she said. "It does." "Does that worry you?" He turned toward her. "Should it?" The answer came too fast. Clara noticed. "I don't know," she said. Sometimes easy things are easy because they're right. Sometimes they're easy because someone is being careful not to be difficult. Elias's face remained calm, but the quiet behind it changed. "And which do you think this is?" "I'm not sure yet." He nodded. A less careful person might have reassured her. Might have said, "I'm not pretending," or "You can trust me," or "I would never hurt you." Elias said none of those things. Instead, he looked back at the river. "That's fair," he said. It was fair. It was mature. It was exactly what she needed him to say. And that, somehow, was the problem. Later, at her building, he did not ask to come inside. He did not try to kiss her. He simply stood with her beneath the dim entrance light, his coat collar turned up against the wind. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "I'd like that too." His smile was small and real enough to make her chest ache. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." This time, when he turned away, he looked back once. She was glad he did. Upstairs, Clara leaned against her closed door and listened to the quiet apartment. Her hand still remembered his. She felt happy. Calmly, deeply happy. But beneath the happiness was the same thin thread from the first night, pulled a little tighter now. Something about Elias did not frighten her. Something about him did not feel false. But something about him felt arranged. As if every gentle moment had found its place too easily. As if, somewhere just out of sight, a page had already been turned. Chapter 3: The Way He Responded. The next morning, Clara woke with the feeling that she had forgotten something important. For a few seconds she lay still, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sound of someone closing a door in the hall. The light behind the curtains was pale and thin. Her apartment felt unchanged, but her body carried the memory of the night before as if she had brought part of the river home with her. Then she remembered his hand. Not dramatically. Not with a rush. Simply as a warmth returning to the center of her palm. She turned onto her side and looked at her phone on the table beside the bed. There was no message. That should have pleased her. It did, partly. Elias did not crowd her. He did not behave as though one evening had given him the right to enter every hour that followed. He seemed to understand distance in a way most people had to be taught. Still, she watched the quiet screen longer than she meant to. At the gallery, the day was slow. A soft rain had returned, though lightly, and visitors moved through the exhibition with damp coats and quiet faces. Clara spent the morning answering small questions. Was the artist local? Was photography allowed? Was the cafe open? She answered kindly. She always did. But part of her mind remained elsewhere, turning over small pieces of Elias-like stones found in a pocket. He had not argued when she said the ease worried her. He had not tried to persuade her out of her discomfort. He had not even seemed offended. That was good. More than good. So why did it trouble her? Near midday, she stood alone in the smallest gallery room, the one that was always too cold. 3 photographs hung along the far wall. Each showed a different empty chair beside a window. The artist had called the series Rooms Waiting for No One. Clara had disliked the title at first. It felt too direct. But today it seemed strangely accurate. Her phone vibrated once in her coat pocket. She waited a moment before looking, as if the waiting gave her more control. It was Elias. The cold room crossed my mind today. I hope it is behaving. Clara exhaled quietly. She smiled, but not fully. He had remembered. Of course he had. She typed, still cold. Still pretending not to be. His reply came after a few minutes. A room with dignity. She leaned against the doorway and wrote, "Are you always this attentive?" This time, the pause was longer. Long enough for Clara to imagine him reading the question, placing it carefully among other questions he had not answered. Then he wrote, "No. But I am trying to be." She looked at the words until the screen dimmed. Trying. There was humility in it. There was honesty. But there was also effort. A visible edge of construction. She wrote, "Why?" His answer arrived almost at once. "Because you notice when I don't." Clara felt something small pass through her. It was not fear. It was not even unease yet. It was the sense of a door opening where she had not seen a door. She had not told him that. Not exactly. She had noticed his pauses, his careful answers, his omissions. She had noticed the way he seemed to speak toward what she needed. But had he noticed her noticing? Perhaps of course he had. Clara was not as unreadable as she sometimes believed. Maybe her silences had been clear. Maybe her questions had shown him enough. Still, the message sat strangely in her hand. Because you notice when I don't. It was gentle. It was perceptive. It was also too exact. Before she could answer, footsteps sounded behind her. Martin, one of the gallery assistants, appeared carrying a box of brochures. Clara, do you know where the spare labels went? In the storage drawer under the printer. The one that sticks? The one that sighs. Martin grinned. Perfect. Thank you. When he left, Clara looked back at her phone. She wrote only, that sounds tiring. Elias replied. Sometimes. But not unpleasant. She did not answer after that. For the rest of the day, she moved through her tasks with a quiet sense of being watched, though she knew she was not. It was less about Elias himself and more about the attention he had awakened in her. She began to notice how everyone responded to everyone else. A woman laughed too quickly at her friend's comment near the sculpture room. A man apologized to a guard before asking where the restroom was, as if he expected annoyance. A child stood before a large red painting and whispered, "It looks angry," while his mother said, "It's just abstract," in the tone adults used when they were uncomfortable with accuracy. People were always adjusting themselves, Clara realized. Softening, hiding, guessing, offering versions of themselves that might be easier to receive. Maybe Elias was not unusual. Maybe he was only better at it. That evening, when Clara returned home, she found herself wanting ordinary noise. She opened the window despite the damp air and let in the sound of the street, tires on wet pavement, a dog barking once, someone calling across the road. She put lentils in a pot because Nora had made the idea permanent in her life, then sliced carrots slowly while water gathered on the glass. Her phone rang just as the soup began to simmer. Elias. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. Is this a bad time? He asked. No. I'm making soup. Lentil? Clara closed her eyes briefly. Yes. Nora would approve. She would insist I add more garlic. Would she be right? Unfortunately. His voice warmed with amusement. Then I won't interrupt the garlic. She reached for a clove from the small bowl beside the stove. You already have. I'm sorry. No, you're not. A pause. Then a soft laugh. No. Not entirely. It was such a small imperfection. Such a human admission. Clara felt herself relaxing before she could prevent it. She placed the phone on speaker and continued cooking. Elias did not talk constantly. He let the small sounds of her kitchen exist, the knife against the cutting board, the lid shifting on the pot, the water running in the sink. What are you doing? She asked. Sitting by the window. That sounds dramatic. It's a very ordinary window. Still. I can move away from it if that helps. She smiled. No. Stay by your dramatic ordinary window. He breathed a quiet laugh. For several minutes, they spoke about nothing important. The weather. The strange behavior of old radiators. The difficulty of buying pears at the exact right moment. Clara told him that one of her plants seemed determined to survive only when ignored. Some living things dislike being watched too closely, he said. She stirred the soup. There it was again. A sentence that seemed to refer to more than it said. Do you, she asked, dislike being watched? Yes. I don't know. How can you not know? Because being watched and being seen are not the same thing. Clara lowered the heat. No, she said. They aren't. Being watched can feel like a test. Being seen can feel like rest. The sentence was beautiful, and she hated for a moment that it was beautiful. It reached her too quickly. It made a place inside her soften before she had decided whether to invite him there. You speak in finished thoughts, she said. He went quiet. Clara wished she had said it differently, or not at all. Then Elias said, I know. His voice was lower now, less polished. Why? I spent a long time not speaking unless I knew exactly what I meant. Clara leaned against the counter. As a child? Another pause. Yes. The rain pressed softly against the window. She waited, careful not to push. My mother loved language, he said. She believed words could repair things if they were chosen well enough. Clara listened. And your father? The silence that followed was not long, but it was denser than the others. My father preferred silence, Elias said. That was all. Clara understood that a door had opened only an inch. She also understood that he had opened it deliberately, perhaps because she had asked why his thoughts sounded finished. I'm sorry, she said. You don't have to be. No. But I am. He did not answer immediately. Then, quietly, thank you. The soup was ready, but Clara did not move to serve it. She stood in the small yellow light of her kitchen, the phone resting on the counter between the cutting board and the salt. The conversation had become so still that she could hear him breathing. She wondered what his room looked like. She imagined shelves of tapes, a desk lamp, a window holding rain. Then she realized something. You never ask me about my parents, she said. Elias seemed to take that in. No, he said. I haven't. Why? I wasn't sure you wanted me to. That usually doesn't stop people. I know. She looked toward the living room, where the tulips were beginning to open wider in their jar. My mother died when I was 19, Clara said. The words came calmly. She had said them many times before. They had become a small bridge she knew how to cross. Elias did not fill the silence. She continued, My father lives in another country now. We speak on birthdays, sometimes Christmas. He sends postcards from places I've never seen. What does he write? Mostly weather. Museums. He asks if I'm eating enough, which is funny because he has no idea what I eat. Do you keep them? Yes. Where? In a blue box under my bed. The answer surprised her. She had not meant to be that specific. Elias said nothing for a moment. Then, gently, that sounds like something you keep because you don't know what else to do with it. Clara looked down at her hands. A small ache moved through her. Yes, she said. Exactly. His accuracy comforted her. It also unsettled her. Both feelings arrived together, impossible to separate. She served the soup while they stayed on the phone. He did not eat, she did. There was something oddly intimate about it, his quiet presence beside an ordinary meal. Afterward, she carried the bowl to the sink and watched steam rise from the water. "I'm going to say something," she said. "All right." When you respond to things, it's almost always what I would want someone to say. Elias was silent. Clara continued carefully. "Not in a bad way. It's kind. It feels safe. But sometimes it feels, I don't know, too smooth." The quiet stretched. For the first time since she had known him, Elias did not answer gracefully. He said nothing for so long that Clara thought the call might have dropped. "Elias? I'm here." His voice had changed. Not upset. Not defensive. But farther away. "I don't know how to respond to that without proving your point," he said. The honesty of it pierced her. She sat down at the kitchen table. "That's a very good response," she said softly. "I know." And then, to her surprise, they both laughed. Not loudly. Not enough to break the mood entirely. But enough to let air back into the room. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "Don't be. You're right to say it." "Am I?" "Yes." "Does it bother you?" "Yes," he said. "But not because you said it." "Then why?" "Because I recognize it." Clara waited. The rain grew lighter. "I think," Elias said slowly, "I learned to become easy to be near." The sentence was plain, almost bare. Clara felt something in her chest loosen. "That sounds lonely," she said. "It was useful first." "And later?" "Later, I forgot which parts were useful and which parts were me." The words settled deeply. For a moment, Clara no longer felt suspicious. She felt sad for him. More than sad. Tender. She imagined a younger Elias, watchful and quiet, learning the room before entering it fully, choosing each word as if the wrong one might disturb the air. "Maybe everyone does that a little," she said. "Maybe. But not everyone becomes so good at it." No. There was no pride in his voice. Only fatigue. They did not speak much after that. The conversation had gone as far as it could for one evening. When they said goodnight, Clara felt both closer to him and less certain. She slept lightly. In the morning, she dreamed of the bookshop. In the dream, the shelves were arranged like corridors in a house, and every book had her name written inside. She was not frightened. She only kept opening covers, finding Clara, Clara, Clara in different inks, while Elias stood somewhere nearby, unseen, saying, "I didn't put them there." She woke before dawn. The dream faded quickly, but its feeling remained. At the gallery, a new delivery arrived. 3 crates from a private collector. Clara spent most of the morning checking condition reports and signing forms. The practical work steadied her. Measurements, dates, packing lists, small damages noted in careful language. Here was a world where uncertainty could be named precisely. Hairline scratch at lower left corner. Minor discoloration along edge. Frame unstable, handle with care. She thought of Elias. Frame unstable, handle with care. The thought made her sad, and then annoyed that she had made him into an object in her mind. Near lunch, Martin appeared beside her with 2 coffees. "You look like you're thinking too hard," he said. "I wasn't aware my face announced that. It sends newsletters." She took the coffee. Thank you. They stood in the storage room among wooden crates and wrapped canvases. Is this about the bookshop man? Martin asked. Clara looked at him quickly. What? You smiled at your phone twice yesterday. You never smile at your phone unless your sister has done something dramatic with soup. Clara laughed despite herself. His name is Elias. Good name. Slightly haunted. That's unhelpful. Is he? What? Haunted. Clara thought of his pauses. His mother's book. His careful voice saying he had learned to become easy to be near. A little, she said. Martin nodded as if this confirmed something. Just make sure he's not the kind of haunted that wants you to become the house. Clara stared at him. That was unexpectedly wise. I contain occasional furniture. She smiled, but the sentence stayed with her. Not the kind of haunted that wants you to become the house. That evening, Elias asked if she would like to come to his studio the following week. The invitation arrived by message, simple and unadorned. I could show you how recordings are restored, if you'd like. No pressure. Clara read it while standing near her window. The tulips had begun to bend outward, petals loosening with age. His studio. A room of his. Not a cafe, not a river path, not a bookshop tied to his mother's name. A place where he worked with fragments and static. She wanted to see it. That wanting told her something. Not everything, but something. She replied, I'd like that. Then, after a moment, she added, but I may ask too many questions. His answer came quickly. I hope you do. Again, the right thing. This time, Clara did not resent it. Not immediately. She placed the phone down and opened letters from quiet rooms to the final letter, the one Elias had told her to leave for another night. It was short. Much shorter than the others. It began with certainty and ended without a signature. The writer described meeting someone who seemed to know how to stand in every silence. Someone who arrived gently, without demand, and made the world feel less sharp. But toward the end, the letter changed. The writer began to wonder whether comfort could become a kind of mirror, whether being understood too quickly might prevent a person from discovering what they had not yet said. Clara read the last lines twice. I do not fear him. I fear how little I have to explain. She closed the book slowly. The apartment seemed very quiet. Outside, the old cinema sign flickered once, then steadied. Clara picked up her phone and looked again at Elias's last message. I hope you do. She imagined him in his studio, surrounded by old voices, patiently removing noise from other people's memories. She imagined his hands adjusting dials, his head bent toward sound. She imagined him choosing his words with the same careful attention, taking the static out of himself before allowing anyone to hear him. It was kind, perhaps. It was survival, perhaps. But as she sat alone in the soft evening light, Clara understood that the question had changed. It was no longer only whether Elias was being honest. It was whether a person could be too practiced at gentleness. Whether a calm voice could hide not danger, but absence. Whether someone could say every right thing and still leave behind the faintest, quietest doubt. Because Elias never made her feel unsafe. That was not the trouble. The trouble was that he made safety feel designed. Chapter 4, Small Details That Didn't Match. Clara visited Elias's studio on a Tuesday evening, when the city was neither raining nor clear, but held in a soft gray pause between weather. The building stood on a narrow street behind the old post office, where the pavements were uneven and the windows above the shops glowed with the private light of people making dinner. It was not the kind of building she had imagined. She had expected something hidden, perhaps an attic above a music store or a basement room with old pipes and yellow lamps. Instead, it was a plain brick building with a black door and 6 brass buzzers arranged in a row. Elias had written the directions carefully. 3rd floor. Door on the left. The lift works only when it feels hopeful. The lift did not feel hopeful. Clara climbed the stairs, listening to her own footsteps echo against the walls. The air smelled faintly of dust, paper, and something metallic. On the 2nd floor landing, a bicycle leaned beneath a window. On the 3rd, there was a small potted fern placed beside the door on the left. The fern surprised her. It looked well cared for, but not decorative. More like something kept alive out of responsibility. Before she could knock, the door opened. Elias stood there in a dark sweater with the sleeves pushed to his wrists. He looked different without his coat, less arranged somehow, thinner around the edges. His hair was slightly untidy, and there was a smudge of dust near one cuff. "I heard you on the stairs," he said. The lift had no hope. It rarely does. He stepped back to let her in. The studio was warm, though the windows were tall and old. One room opened into another, divided by shelves and a half wall. There were tapes in clear cases, boxes labeled in neat handwriting, a long desk with equipment Clara did not recognize, and a pair of headphones resting beside a keyboard. Small lamps gave the room a low amber glow. Nothing was cluttered, but nothing felt empty either. Every object seemed to have been placed where it could be reached without thought. Near the window stood a kettle, 2 cups, and a jar of chamomile tea. Clara saw it immediately. Chamomile. The tea she had ordered at the tea room. It was an ordinary thing. People kept chamomile. People offered guests gentle tea at night. Still, a small part of her registered it, placed it beside other small things, and did not yet decide what it meant. "This is peaceful," she said. "I hoped it would be." He seemed to hear the echo of his own words, because his expression changed. Then he added, more plainly, "I cleaned." Clara smiled. "That sounds more believable." "It is also true." He took her coat and hung it near the door. She noticed he did not look inside her bag when she set it down, did not glance at her phone, did not make her feel observed in any obvious way. His restraint was so consistent that it had become a kind of presence. He showed her the work table first. "This is where I listen badly before I listen well," he said. On the desk sat a reel-to-reel machine, a small digital console, 2 monitors, and several notebooks. One was open. Clara did not mean to read it, but her eyes caught a line written in black ink. Room tone before voice. Elias saw her looking and turned the notebook slightly, not away from her, but toward himself. "Notes," he said. "For the recording?" "For how to enter it." She looked at him. "Enter it?" "Every recording has a room around it. Even if you can barely hear it. A chair moving. A pipe. Air pressure. Someone breathing before they speak. If you remove too much, the voice becomes unreal." Clara felt the sentence settle somewhere deep. "If you remove too much," she repeated, "the voice becomes unreal." "Yes." He looked at her as if he knew she had heard more in it than the technical explanation. But this time he did not shape the moment for her. He turned to the machine and lifted a small tape box from the desk. This one is simple, he said. A family recording from the late 70s. Mostly a birthday dinner. The client only wants the grandmother's voice clearer. He placed headphones in front of her. May I? Clara nodded. He gently adjusted them over her ears. His hands did not linger. At first she heard only static. Then, slowly, voices emerged beneath it. A child laughing. A man saying something too distant to understand. Plates. A chair. Then an older woman's voice, thin but warm, singing a few lines of a birthday song. The sound was damaged, wavering, half swallowed by hiss. Elias adjusted a control. The static softened. The woman's voice came forward, clearer, but so did something else, the room itself. The plates seemed nearer. The child's laugh brightened. Someone in the background said, "Careful, it's hot," and Clara felt suddenly, almost painfully, that she was standing in a kitchen that no longer existed. Elias stopped the playback. Clara removed the headphones slowly. "That felt private," she said. "It is. Does it bother you to hear so much of people?" "Yes," he said. "I try to be careful with what doesn't belong to me." Again, the right answer. But here, in his studio, surrounded by work that required carefulness, it sounded less rehearsed. Or perhaps she wanted it to. He made tea. Chamomile for her, black for himself. He did not mention that he remembered. He simply set the cup before her as if it were natural. Clara wrapped her hands around it. "Do you ever restore something and wish you hadn't heard it?" she asked. "Yes." "What do you do then?" "Finish the work. Forget what I can." "Can you?" "Not always." He leaned against the edge of the desk, holding his cup. The room was quiet except for the low hum of equipment. Clara looked at the shelves. The labels on the boxes were precise but not revealing. Dates. Initials. Archive numbers. Then she noticed one shelf apart from the others, higher up, holding several unmarked tapes. No dates. No names. "Are those yours?" she asked. Elias followed her gaze. "Yes." "What are they?" He took a sip of tea before answering. "Old family recordings." "Your mother's?" "Some." "And your father's?" His hand stilled around the cup. "Some." The door closed again. Clara did not push. But she could feel the shape of what was not said, and tonight it seemed larger than before. In the warm studio, among all those preserved voices, his silence was almost louder. He changed the subject gently, asking about her day at the gallery. She let him. They spoke for a while. He listened as she described a visitor who had stood in front of one photograph for nearly 40 minutes without moving. He asked what the photograph showed. She told him, a kitchen table with 3 oranges and an empty glass. "What do you think he saw in it?" Elias asked. "Something of his own, probably." "Do you think art gives people permission to miss things?" Clara smiled faintly. "You do speak like the back of a book." "I'm trying to stop." "Don't stop completely." He looked at her, and there was such quiet pleasure in his face that she had to look down at her tea. For a few minutes, everything felt simple. Then Elias said, "You wore blue today." Clara glanced at her dress. It was dark blue, soft cotton, with sleeves to the wrist. "I did." "You said once you wear blue when you want the day to stay calm." Clara frowned lightly. I said that? Yes. On the phone. You were talking about the gallery poster. She searched her memory. She had spoken about the blue poster. She remembered that. But had she said she wore blue when she wanted calm? It sounded like something she might say, perhaps as a passing thought. Still, she could not place it. I don't remember saying that, she said. Elias's expression did not change, but something behind it sharpened. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe. There was no reason for the moment to matter. People remembered conversations differently. He had perhaps connected two separate things, or she had forgotten her own words. But the certainty with which he had said it remained in the room. You said once. Not I think. Not maybe. You said once. Later, while Elias showed her how he marked damaged sections of audio, Clara noticed another small mismatch. On the wall above his desk was a calendar. It was open to May, though they were still in late October. The picture was of a field under morning fog. There were no appointments written on it, no dates circled, no practical reason for it to be there. Your calendar is wrong, she said. Elias looked up. Oh. Yes. It's May. I know. Do you keep it there for the picture? He glanced at it, then away. Something like that. Clara waited. He did not continue. What happened in May? She asked gently. His face remained calm. Many things happen in May. That was evasive. Yes. The word was honest, but not open. He moved to the desk and closed one of the notebooks. I'm sorry, he said. I know that must be frustrating. The apology was soft. Correct. Immediate. Clara looked at him. Elias. Yes? You don't always have to respond well. He was quiet. I don't know what to do with that, he said. The answer came so plainly that the irritation she had felt loosened at once. She set down her cup. Maybe nothing. He nodded, but he looked unsettled now. Not visibly shaken. Only less smooth, as if a hand had passed over still water. The studio felt different after that. Still warm, still calm, but less seamless. Clara noticed the hum of the machines more. She noticed a stack of papers turned face down. She noticed that the fern outside the door had a small white tag tucked into the soil, though she had not seen it closely enough to read. She also noticed that Elias seemed to be trying not to repair the moment. That moved her more than any perfect answer could have. He let the silence exist badly. After a while, he said, Would you like to hear something of mine? Clara looked up. Yes. He went to the shelf with the unmarked tapes and took one down. He handled it differently from the others. More slowly. He placed it on the machine, adjusted the reel, and did not offer her the headphones this time. The sound filled the room through the speakers. At first there was only air. Then a woman's voice. She was reading aloud. Her voice was low and textured, with a calm intelligence that made Clara imagine dark hair, tired eyes, hands folded around a book. The house remembers what the people cannot, the woman read. It keeps the step, the breath, the cup placed down too hard. It forgives nothing, because it judges nothing. The recording crackled softly. Elias stood beside the desk, not moving. Your mother? Clara asked. Yes. What is she reading? Something she wrote. The woman continued for a little longer, then stopped suddenly. In the background, a child coughed. A small child. Then the woman said, "Not into the microphone, Elias, if you're going to listen, come closer." The recording ended. The room felt very still. Clara did not speak at first. She could not tell whether Elias had meant for her to hear that last line. Perhaps he had. Perhaps he had forgotten it was there. Both possibilities seemed equally tender and equally strange. He removed the tape carefully. "She had a beautiful voice," Clara said. "She did. Do you listen to these often?" "No." The answer was too fast. Clara looked at him. "Elias." He let out a slow breath. "Yes," he said. "I do." There it was. A small correction. A truth replacing the answer he had first offered. Clara felt it like a match struck in a dim room. "Why did you say no?" "I wanted the answer to sound healthier." It was such an unexpected sentence that Clara almost laughed, but did not. Instead, she said, "Thank you for saying that." He looked down at the tape in his hands. "I don't always know when honesty sounds like too much. Maybe it doesn't have to sound like anything." He nodded slowly. The evening had grown darker outside. The windows now reflected the studio back at them. The lamps, the shelves, Elias standing with the tape, Clara seated near the desk with her hands around a cooling cup of tea. In the reflection, they looked like people inside a memory. Not living it. Preserved in it. Clara stood and walked toward the window. Below, the street was quiet. A woman crossed with a paper bag held against her chest. Somewhere, a dog tugged at its leash and then disappeared around the corner. "When did your mother die?" Clara asked. She knew it was a direct question. She also knew he might not answer. Elias stood behind her, not too close. "In May," he said. Clara looked at the calendar. May. There it was. A detail that matched, finally, but only after being hidden. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know." "How old were you?" 23. She turned to him. "That's young." "Yes." "What happened?" He looked at the calendar, then at the tape in his hand. "She became ill," he said. Slowly. Then quickly. Clara recognized the kind of answer people gave when the whole truth was too large for one room. "My mother died in November," she said. "It still makes the month feel like a hallway I have to walk through every year." Elias looked at her with a sudden softness that was not polished at all. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly what it feels like." For once, his agreement did not feel practiced. It felt immediate because it was true. Clara crossed the room and stood near him. "You could have told me about May," she said. "I know." "Why didn't you?" He ran his thumb along the edge of the tape box. "Because if I tell people what hurts too early, they either become careful in a way I can't trust, or they try to be important inside it." Clara absorbed this. It was not a perfect answer. It was not even entirely fair. But it sounded real. "I understand," she said. "I thought you might." Again, the right thing. But now she heard the fatigue beneath it, the old habit, the effort to meet her where she stood. The studio clock read 9:30. Clara knew she should leave soon. She also knew that leaving would change the evening into something she would have to think about alone. Elias offered to walk her home. She declined gently. I'd like to walk by myself tonight, she said. He nodded. All right. No hurt. No pressure. Then, after a moment, he added, I want to say that gracefully, but I also want you to know I wish you'd let me. Clara smiled. That was better than graceful. He looked almost relieved. At the door, he handed her coat back. As she slipped it on, her eyes fell on the fern outside the studio. The small white tag in the soil was visible now. Clara. She bent slightly. The tag had one word printed on it in faded ink, Clara. Not handwritten. Not newly placed. It looked like the plant label from a shop, perhaps the variety of fern, though she had never heard of a fern called Clara. Elias noticed her looking. It came with that name, he said. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. Clara straightened. A plant named Clara. Yes. That's convenient. It was there before I met you. She believed him, almost. The fern looked older than their acquaintance. Its pot had mineral stains near the bottom. The leaves were full and settled, not newly bought. Still, the small white tag seemed absurdly bright in the hallway light. Another explainable thing. Another detail that did not sit easily. Good night, Elias, she said. Good night, Clara. She walked down the stairs instead of waiting for the lift to reconsider hope. Outside, the air was cool and smelled of stone. The city had grown quiet in that hour when restaurants were still open but shops had closed, when people moved more slowly because the day had already asked its questions. Clara walked without music. She wanted to hear her own thoughts. But her thoughts did not arrive in order. They came as fragments. Chamomile tea waiting by the kettle. You wore blue today. The calendar opened to May. Room tone before voice. I wanted the answer to sound healthier. The fern with her name. She turned each detail over, and each one gave way to a reasonable explanation. He remembered her tea because he paid attention. He misremembered the blue dress conversation because memory was imperfect. The calendar marked his mother's death. The fern was coincidence. Everything could be explained. That was becoming the strange part. Nothing was wrong enough to hold. Nothing was strange enough to accuse. But the details kept gathering, light as dust, until the air itself felt changed. When Clara reached her apartment, she did not turn on the main light. She left the room in the soft glow from the street and sat on the edge of her sofa. The tulips on the windowsill had begun to droop. One petal had fallen onto the wood below, pale and curved like a small quiet ear. Her phone vibrated. A message from Elias. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry for the parts that felt unclear. Clara read it. Then another message appeared. I am trying not to become only what people need. She sat very still. There it was again, the exact sentence that touched the center of the unease before she had named it to him. Not what she wanted him to say. What she had almost feared. Clara placed the phone face down on the sofa beside her. For several minutes, she listened to the apartment settle around her. Pipes clicked softly. A car passed outside. Somewhere above, footsteps crossed a floor and stopped. She thought of Elias as a child in the recording, listening from the edge of a room while his mother read about houses, remembering what people could not. She thought of him as a man surrounded by damaged voices, learning to remove hiss without removing breath. She thought of how careful he was. How kind. and how every time she moved toward the hidden parts of him, something else appeared first. A sentence. A graceful explanation. A detail that made sense too late. Clara picked up the phone again. She typed, "I don't need you to be perfect." She waited before sending it. Then she deleted perfect and wrote easy. "I don't need you to be easy." She sent the message. His reply came after a long time. "I don't know who I am when I'm not." Clara held the phone with both hands. Outside, the old cinema sign flickered through her curtains, on and off, like a thought trying to stay awake. She did not answer. Not because she was angry. Not because she was afraid. But because, for the first time, Clara understood that the mystery of Elias was not hidden in some dramatic secret from his past. It was quieter than that. It was in the way his truth seemed to arrive already softened. In the way his sadness seemed edited before she heard it. In the way every room around him felt warm, careful, and faintly staged. And as she sat in the dim apartment, with her own reflection barely visible in the dark window, Clara wondered whether she was falling for a man she had met, or for the beautiful shape he had learned to make around himself. Chapter 5: The First Doubt. The next morning felt slower than usual. Clara woke before her alarm again, but this time she did not reach for her phone immediately. She lay still, watching the soft outline of the curtains shift with the early light. The city had not fully woken yet. Somewhere outside, a single car passed, then silence returned as if it had only been passing through. Her message from the night before stayed in her mind. "I don't need you to be easy." His reply. "I don't know who I am when I'm not." It had not sounded like something prepared. Not shaped to land well. Not softened. It had simply been there, uncertain and unguarded. And yet, even that honesty carried a strange echo. As if the moment had been waiting. Clara sat up slowly. The tulips on the windowsill had opened too far. One more petal had fallen during the night. She picked it up, turning it lightly between her fingers before placing it in the sink. The apartment felt ordinary again. That was something she needed. Ordinary light. Ordinary quiet. Ordinary thoughts. She made tea. Chamomile. She paused, noticing it. Of course she had chamomile in her kitchen long before Elias. It was not unusual. It did not belong to him. Still, she switched to black tea instead. Not as a rejection. Just a small reclaiming. At the gallery, the day moved in soft repetitions. Visitors drifted in and out, their voices low, footsteps absorbed by the wooden floors. Clara guided two groups through the exhibition, repeating familiar explanations with slight variations, adjusting her tone to match each room. She noticed something new about herself. She was listening differently. Not just to the visitors, but to her own words. She heard where she softened explanations. Where she simplified things to make them easier to understand. Where she avoided saying something more complicated because it would take longer to explain. She had always done that. Everyone did. But now, she was aware of it. That awareness made her slightly uncomfortable. It also made Elias feel closer, even in his absence. Around midday, her phone vibrated. She looked at it without picking it up. Then she turned it face down and finished speaking with a couple near the window. Only after they left did she check. "Elias. I hope you slept." No elaborate sentence. No carefully shaped meaning. Just that. Clara stared at the message longer than she expected to. Then she typed. I did. She hesitated. Then added, you? His reply came after a few minutes. Not much. But enough. Clara exhaled quietly. There was something about the simplicity of the exchange that steadied her. No perfect phrasing. No emotional precision. Just two people acknowledging the morning. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. But the steadiness didn't last. Because as the day continued, small things began to collect again. Not dramatic things. Not anything she could point to and say this is wrong. Just details. Small, quiet details. That afternoon, Clara stopped at a grocery store on her way home. She moved slowly through the aisles, choosing things without much thought. Bread. Yogurt. A handful of apples. She stood for a moment in front of the tea shelf. Chamomile. Black tea. Green tea. Her hand hovered. Then she chose mint. Something different. At the register, the cashier smiled politely and asked if she needed a bag. Clara said no. She always said no. Outside, the air had cooled. The sky was pale and clear, the kind of evening that made everything feel briefly suspended. As she walked home, her phone vibrated again. Elias. Are you walking? She stopped. The question was simple. Reasonable. They often texted around this time. Still, she looked up at the street around her. A man locking his bicycle. A woman speaking into her phone. A bus passing at the corner. Nothing unusual. She typed, yes. A moment later. How does it feel today? Clara frowned slightly. She looked down at her shoes, at the pavement, at the thin shadows stretching across the street. How does it feel today? It was the kind of question he would ask. Open. Gentle. But also, slightly misplaced. I don't know, she murmured to herself. Then she typed, normal. His reply. That's good. She slipped the phone into her coat pocket. Normal. Yes. That's what she wanted. And yet the word didn't settle as easily as she hoped. At home, she unpacked her groceries and set the kettle to boil. The apartment held a quiet stillness that felt slightly different from the night before. Less heavy. But not entirely light. She placed the mint tea on the counter and watched the water heat. Then, almost without thinking, she opened her phone again. She scrolled up through her conversation with Elias. Not quickly. Carefully. She read their messages from the beginning. The book. The rain. The third letter. The tulips. The small jokes. The quiet observations. It was all seamless. Not in a bad way. But in a way that felt almost edited. She stopped at one message. The light looks like you. Clara read it again. Then again. It was beautiful. It still was. But now, instead of feeling only warmth, she felt something else layered beneath it. A question. Had he meant it in that exact way? Or had he shaped it, just slightly, to feel like something more? She scrolled further. Because you notice when I don't. I am trying not to become only what people need. I don't know who I am when I'm not. Each sentence carried weight. Each sentence felt precise. each sentence arrived exactly where it should. Too often. Clara placed the phone down slowly. She sat at the kitchen table, hands resting flat against the wood. The kettle clicked softly in the background. This is what doubt feels like, she realized. Not loud. Not urgent. Just a quiet shift in how things connect. She didn't answer Elias that evening. Not immediately. Not out of intention. But because she wanted to feel what it was like not to respond. To let the space exist. It felt unfamiliar. Uncomfortable, even. Around 9, another message appeared. Are you all right? Clara stared at it. Then she typed, yes. Just quiet tonight. His reply came almost instantly. Of course. No questions. No pressure. No attempt to draw her back. Again, the right response. Clara leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. There it was. That feeling again. Relief and something else. Because even his restraint was perfect. The next day, Clara decided to do something small. Something that would help her understand. Not him. But the space between them. At lunch, she texted him first. What are you doing right now? His reply came after a short pause. Listening to a damaged recording. It refuses to settle. Clara smiled faintly. She imagined him in the studio, adjusting dials, leaning close to sound. She typed, that sounds frustrating. A moment. Then. It is. But also interesting. Clara watched the typing indicator disappear. Then reappear. Then disappear again. Finally. What are you doing? She hesitated. Then she wrote, eating lunch. Another pause. Then. What are you having? She looked down at her food. A simple sandwich. She could have said that. Instead, she typed, something boring. His reply came almost immediately. I don't believe you eat boring things. Clara blinked. It was a small sentence. Playful. Light. But it landed strangely. Why? Because he was correcting her. Not directly. Not firmly. But gently replacing her own description with something that fit better. Clara looked at her sandwich again. It was, in fact, boring. She typed, it's just a sandwich. A longer pause this time. Then it's a good sandwich. She exhaled slowly. There it was again. Not wrong. Never wrong. Just adjusted. Softly. Carefully. Consistently. That evening, Clara went for a walk without her phone. She left it on the kitchen table deliberately. The apartment felt quieter without it. Lighter. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her, feeling a small sense of separation. The street was calm. The sky had deepened into a soft blue-gray, and the air carried that cool edge that comes just before night fully settles. She walked without direction. No music. No messages. Just her own thoughts. At first, they felt scattered. Then slowly, they began to settle. She thought about Elias. Not about what he said. But how he said it. How he responded. How he adjusted. How he filled the space just enough. Always just enough. And she realized something. It wasn't that he was saying the right things. It was that he rarely said the wrong ones. Almost never. And that absence was starting to feel unnatural. Clara stopped near the river. The water moved quietly beneath the lights, reflecting fragments of gold and shadow. She leaned against the railing and watched it for a while. People make mistakes, she thought. They misunderstand. They say things too quickly. Or too slowly. They choose the wrong word. Or forget the right one. That's what makes conversation real. That's what makes someone feel present. But Elias. He moved through conversations like someone who had already considered every version of them. Not in a controlling way. Not in a manipulative way. Just precisely. Too precisely. Clara closed her eyes briefly. This is the first doubt, she realized. Not fear. Not suspicion. Just a question. A quiet, persistent question. Am I getting to know him? Or am I only meeting the version of him that knows how to be known? She opened her eyes and looked at the river again. The water didn't answer. It just kept moving, carrying reflections that never stayed long enough to examine. When she returned home, her phone lit up as soon as she picked it up. 3 messages from Elias. Are you all right? I didn't mean to interrupt your quiet. I hope your evening is gentle. Clara sat down slowly. She read them again. There was care in them. Real care. She could feel it. But beneath that care, there was something else. Something that now, for the first time, she could name. Awareness. Not just of her, but of how to be with her. And that awareness felt practiced. Clara typed slowly. I went for a walk without my phone. A moment passed. Then. That sounds peaceful. She stared at the message. Then she wrote, it was. Another pause. Then. I'm glad. Clara held the phone in both hands. Her reflection appeared faintly in the dark screen. She looked at herself. At the quiet room around her. At the space between her thoughts. And for the first time, she allowed the doubt to exist without trying to soften it. Not because she wanted to pull away. Not because she didn't care. But because something inside her had shifted. Something small. Something important. The first doubt wasn't about who Elias was. It was about how real he felt. And that difference changed everything. Chapter 6, The Pattern. The doubt did not grow loudly. It did not demand attention or disrupt Clara's days in any visible way. It moved quietly beside everything else, like a second rhythm beneath the first. If she had been asked, she might have said nothing had changed. She still went to work. She still met Elias. She still slept, ate, walked, read. But something had shifted in how she listened. Not only to him. To everything. 3 days passed before she saw Elias again. They did not plan it in advance. It happened in the same unforced way many of their meetings had begun. A message in the late afternoon. I'll be near the river this evening, he wrote. If you are. Clara read the message while standing near the gallery window. Outside, the sky was pale and almost colorless, the kind of light that made the city look softer than it was. She hesitated. Not long. Just enough to notice that she was hesitating. Then she wrote, I might be. He replied, I'll walk slowly. It made her smile. It also made her pause. "I'll walk slowly." It was thoughtful. It was gentle. It left space for her to join or not join, without pressure. And again, it was exactly right. Clara placed her phone down and looked out at the street. People moved past the window in quiet patterns. A woman adjusting her scarf. A man holding a paper bag close to his chest. Someone laughing into a phone. Everything ordinary. Everything slightly distant. By the time Clara left the gallery, the light had begun to fade. She walked toward the river without deciding fully whether she would meet him. She told herself she was only walking, nothing more. But as she turned the final corner, she saw him. He was standing near the railing, looking at the water. His posture was the same as she remembered, calm, unhurried, as if time did not press on him in the way it did on others. He turned before she spoke. As if he had felt her. "Clara." "Elias." They stood for a moment without moving closer. Then she stepped beside him. The river moved quietly below them, reflecting the first lights of evening. "I wasn't sure if you would come," he said. "I wasn't sure either." "That sounds honest." "It is." He nodded, accepting it without adjusting the moment. That was new. Or perhaps she was noticing it now. They began walking. Not touching. Not quite close. Just near enough that their steps aligned naturally. For a while, they said very little. The silence between them felt different from before. It was not uncomfortable. But it was not seamless either. It had texture now. Edges. Clara found herself listening not just to what he said, but to how long it took him to say it. To the pauses. To the moments where something almost appeared, then didn't. After a few minutes, Elias spoke. "I thought about what you said." "Which part?" "That you don't need me to be easy." Clara looked ahead. "And?" "I'm not sure I know how to stop." The honesty was quiet. Not shaped. Not softened. It stayed between them without trying to become something more. Clara felt a small warmth in her chest. "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to change it all at once." He let out a slow breath. "I don't know what I would sound like if I didn't." "You might sound uncertain." "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is." He smiled faintly. "I think I've been avoiding that for a long time." "I can see that." They walked a little further. A cyclist passed them, the sound of wheels soft against the pavement. A couple stood near the water, speaking quietly. Clara noticed something. Elias had not filled the silence. He had not offered another observation. He had not tried to guide the conversation. He was simply there. It felt different. Realer. But also less stable. As if the structure she had grown used to was no longer holding the moment in place. After a while, he said, "What did you do today?" Clara glanced at him. The question was ordinary. Simple. She answered without thinking. "Work." A new delivery arrived. 3 crates from a private collection. "What kind of collection?" "Mostly photography. Some early prints." "Did you like them?" "Some of them." "Which ones?" Clara slowed slightly. There it was. The pattern. Question. Answer. Follow-up. Clarification. Not intrusive. Not overwhelming. Just precise. Always moving toward more detail. They were images of empty rooms, she said. Different houses. Different cities. What kind of rooms? Living rooms, mostly. Kitchens. One bedroom. What drew you to them? Clara stopped walking. Elias stopped too, immediately. He looked at her, not confused, but attentive. I don't know, she said slowly. He waited. She searched for the answer. Not the easy one. The real one. They felt unfinished, she said. How? They looked like someone had just left. Not long ago. Elias nodded. Not quickly. Not with recognition. Just a small, steady acknowledgement. And you liked that? He asked. Clara frowned slightly. I didn't say that. No, he said softly. You didn't. The correction was gentle. But this time, Clara noticed something else. He had assumed. Just slightly. And then adjusted. It was small. Almost invisible. But it was there. She started walking again. This is what you do, she said. What do I do? You follow things very closely. He considered that. Yes. Why? So I understand them. And if you don't? I keep asking. Clara looked at him. That must be exhausting. It can be. For you or for other people? Elias did not answer immediately. For both, he said. They reached a quieter part of the path, where the lamps were spaced further apart and the river felt darker, more private. Clara leaned lightly against the railing again. I've been thinking about something, she said. Elias turned toward her. I'm listening. She almost smiled at that. Of course you are. It feels like you're always adjusting, she said. In what way? In the way you respond. The way you speak. The way you move through conversations. He was very still now. Adjusting to what? He asked. To me, she said. The words settled between them. Not heavy. But clear. Elias looked at the water for a moment. Then back at her. I am, he said. No hesitation. No denial. Clara felt her breath catch slightly. Why? Because I want to meet you where you are. That sounds good, she said. It does. But it also feels, she paused, searching for the right word. Controlled. Elias did not react immediately. He let the word exist. Controlled, he repeated. Yes. Do you think I'm controlling you? No, Clara said quickly. Not like that. Then what? She struggled to explain it. It's like you're always one step ahead of the conversation, she said. Like you've already considered how something might feel before it happens. Elias listened. Truly listened. Clara could see it in his stillness. In some ways, that makes everything easier, she continued. But in other ways. She stopped. In other ways, he asked softly. It makes it harder to know where you actually are. The sentence surprised her as much as him. Elias looked at her for a long moment. The river moved behind him, dark and steady. I don't know how to be in a conversation without doing that, he said finally. Without adjusting? Yes. Have you ever tried? A small pause. I don't think so. Clara nodded slowly. That's the pattern, she said. Elias's expression changed slightly. How so? You don't just respond, she said. You refine. He absorbed that. You take what's said, and you shape your answer until it fits as well as possible. Yes. And you do it so quickly that it feels natural. Yes. Clara looked down at her hands. And that's what feels strange. Elias was quiet. Not withdrawn. Not defensive. Just quiet. Do you want me to stop? He asked. The question was simple. Direct. And for once, it didn't feel like it had been prepared. Clara thought about it. Carefully. No, she said. Why not? Because it's part of you. And that doesn't bother you? It does, she said honestly. But I don't want you to pretend it's not there. Elias let out a slow breath. That's difficult. I know. They stood there for a while. The night settled further around them. The lamps reflected in the water like scattered fragments of light. Clara felt something new. Not distance. Not closeness. Awareness. Clear and steady. She could see the pattern now. Not completely. But enough. Elias wasn't hiding something obvious. He wasn't lying. He wasn't performing in a dramatic way. He was simply always adjusting. Always refining. Always shaping himself into the version that would feel right. And that made every moment with him feel smooth. But also slightly unreal. Because nothing rough ever appeared. Nothing unfiltered. Nothing that didn't already belong. Clara turned to him. Can I ask you something? Yes. When you're alone, she said, are you still like this? Elias didn't answer immediately. This time, the pause was different. Longer. Less certain. I don't know, he said finally. Clara watched him. That answer felt real. More real than most things he had said. Try to notice, she said gently. I will. They began walking again. Slowly. Without direction. Without filling the silence too quickly. And for the first time since she had met him, Clara felt something settle clearly inside her. Not fear. Not rejection. Just understanding. The pattern wasn't something Elias used to control others. It was something he used to hold himself together. And now that she could see it, she couldn't stop seeing it. Every pause. Every answer. Every careful shift. It was all there. Soft. Precise. Consistent. And quietly, unmistakably. Not entirely real. Chapter 7, What He Didn't Say. The weather changed again at the beginning of November. Not suddenly. The city did not wake beneath snow or storm. The change arrived more quietly than that. The air sharpened. The mornings became pale and thin. Trees along the river lost their leaves one careful branch at a time until the sidewalks filled with damp gold and brown shapes that gathered near drains and corners. Clara noticed the season mostly through sound. Radiators beginning to click awake in old buildings. Scarves brushing against wool coats. The softened footsteps of people walking faster to escape the cold. And beneath all of it, she noticed another sound too. Absence. Not Elias's absence exactly. He was still there. They still spoke. They still met for tea or evening walks or quiet dinners that seemed to settle naturally into her week without either of them announcing that something important was happening. But after the conversation beside the river, after she had finally named the pattern, something had altered between them. Or perhaps within her. Clara could hear the spaces now. Not only what Elias said. What he didn't say. Once she noticed it, she began noticing it everywhere. They were sitting in a small cafe one Thursday evening when it happened again. The cafe stood near the tram station, narrow and warm, with dark wooden walls and lamps shaped like upside-down flowers. Clara liked it because the windows fogged easily in cold weather, making the whole room feel separated from the city outside. Elias arrived 5 minutes late. That, by itself, startled her. Not because lateness mattered, but because it felt unusual for him. Until now he had always appeared exactly when expected, neither rushed nor delayed, as if he carried a private agreement with time itself. When he entered, his hair was damp from mist, and he looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said, removing his coat. The tram stopped for almost 10 minutes. "It's all right. I should have left earlier." The sentence came automatically. Clara saw it happen. The reflexive adjustment. The attempt to place responsibility onto himself before inconvenience could settle anywhere near her. She watched him sit down. "You don't always have to do that," she said gently. "Do what?" "Take ownership of every small disruption." Elias paused halfway through reaching for the menu. Then he lowered it again. "I know," he said quietly. That was becoming his answer lately. "I know." Not defensive. Not resistant. But thoughtful in a way that sometimes made Clara feel guilty for noticing things at all. The server arrived. They ordered tea and soup. Elias asked for black tea without looking at the menu, and Clara noticed that he no longer ordered chamomile for her automatically. Instead he asked, "Mint or chamomile tonight?" The question was small. But Clara felt unexpectedly relieved by it. "Mint," she said. He nodded once. No visible satisfaction at remembering. No graceful comment about the weather needing warmth. No polished observation. Just mint. The simplicity soothed her more than it should have. For a while, they spoke about ordinary things. The gallery was preparing a winter exhibition. Elias had spent most of the week restoring damaged interview tapes from the early 90s. A pipe had burst in his building 2 floors below the studio. Martin had nearly broken a sculpture by turning too quickly while carrying coffee. The conversation moved easily, but differently now. Less seamless. There were pauses that remained pauses. Small moments where neither of them rushed to smooth the air. Clara liked those moments best. And yet, even inside the comfort of them, she kept noticing something else. The shape of omission. For example, whenever she asked about his work, Elias answered fully. When she asked about books, music, weather, memory, childhood objects, cities, sound, grief, silence, he answered. But when the conversation drifted toward people from his past, something changed. Not dramatically. He did not become tense. He did not avoid the subject obviously. He simply reduced. Answers became shorter. More generalized. Like photographs slightly out of focus. At one point Clara asked, "Did you grow up here?" "Yes." "Always?" "Mostly." "What does mostly mean?" My father moved often for work. What kind of work? A pause. Administrative. The word landed strangely. Administrative. Not incorrect. Not false. But empty. Clara stirred her tea slowly. What kind of administrative work? Elias looked at her over the steam rising from his cup. I'm realizing how suspicious that sounds. A little. A faint smile touched his mouth. He worked with archives. Something in Clara sharpened quietly. Archives? Yes. What kind? Government records, mostly. And your mother? She taught literature for a while. For a while? She stopped after she became ill. Again, true answers. But incomplete. Every time she moved toward specifics, the edges blurred. Not enough to accuse. Only enough to notice. And Clara was noticing everything now. The soup arrived. For a few minutes they ate in comfortable silence. Outside, a tram passed slowly through the fogged street, lights sliding across the cafe windows like reflections moving underwater. Clara watched Elias break bread into careful pieces before adding them to his soup. You do that every time, she said. He looked up. What? The bread. He glanced down at his bowl, almost surprised by his own hands. I do. Yes. He smiled slightly. I didn't know that. It's very precise. That sounds dangerous coming from you. Clara laughed softly. It's not criticism. No. No. Just observation. Elias leaned back a little. You've become quieter lately. The statement was gentle. Not accusing. Still, Clara felt herself still. Have I? Yes. How? You pause more before answering. She almost smiled at the irony. And you notice that? I notice most things about you. There it was again. A sentence that could have sounded romantic from someone else. From Elias, it felt almost clinically true. Not cold. Just exact. Clara looked down at her tea. And what do you do with those observations? She asked. The question seemed to catch him slightly off guard. I don't know. Yes, you do. A longer pause. Elias folded his napkin once before answering. I'd try to understand how to be near you without causing harm. The words settled heavily between them. Not because they were frightening. Because they were sincere. Clara felt a small ache in her chest. Harm, she repeated quietly. That's a serious word. It feels accurate. You think you might harm people? I think people do, even when they don't intend to. That's different. Yes, he admitted. Maybe. The server passed nearby carrying a tray of glasses. Somewhere behind them someone laughed too loudly, then lowered their voice. Clara studied Elias carefully. His face remained calm, but not empty. There was thought moving behind it constantly, like someone listening to several conversations at once. What happened to you? She asked softly. The question slipped out before she could soften it. Elias went still. Not frozen. Only very quiet. Clara immediately regretted the phrasing. I didn't mean. No, he said gently. I know what you meant. She waited. He looked at his untouched tea for a long moment. Then he said, My mother spent most of her life trying to predict my father's moods before he entered a room. Clara felt the air shift. Not dramatically. Only enough to sharpen her attention completely. Elias continued speaking calmly, almost too calmly. She believed if she could anticipate things correctly enough, she could prevent conflict before it arrived. The cafe seemed quieter now, though Clara knew it wasn't. And could she asked. Sometimes. His voice remained even. But mostly she became very good at disappearing inside other people's needs. Clara swallowed. The sentence explained something instantly and incompletely at the same time. And you learned that from her? Yes. Not defensive. Not hidden. Just yes. Clara looked at him differently then. Not with suspicion. With recognition. Suddenly the carefulness made sense in a way that frightened her slightly because it removed some of the mystery. Not all. But enough. You became observant to stay safe, she said quietly. Elias looked out the window. Yes. There it was. A real answer. Not polished. Not beautiful. Simple enough to breathe. Clara felt warmth and sadness move through her together. That must have been exhausting as a child. It was useful, he said automatically. Then he stopped himself. A faint expression crossed his face, almost embarrassment. There, he murmured. I did it again. What? Turned it into something neat. Clara watched him carefully. For the first time since she had known him, Elias looked exposed in a way that didn't seem intentional. Not vulnerable attractively. Just tired. He rubbed one hand lightly against his wrist, as if unaware he was doing it. My mother used to say I could feel the emotional temperature of a room before anyone spoke, he said. She thought it was remarkable. And your father? A small silence. He thought it was manipulation. The word landed softly but heavily. Clara did not answer immediately. Outside, rain had begun again, very lightly, barely visible against the glass. Was it? She asked finally. Elias looked at her directly. I honestly don't know. The honesty of the answer unsettled her more than certainty would have. Because he meant it. He truly did not know. They left the cafe an hour later. The rain had deepened into mist. Streetlights glowed through it in blurred halos. Elias walked beside her without touching her, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly curved against the cold. The city felt quieter than usual. Or perhaps Clara's thoughts were simply louder. You never talk about friends, she said suddenly as they crossed a side street. Elias glanced at her. What? Friends. Old relationships. People from your life. A pause. I suppose I don't. Why? He considered the question carefully. I'm not sure. That's not true. He smiled faintly. You're becoming very difficult to evade. I think you trained me accidentally. The smile lingered briefly, then faded. I had a few close friends growing up, he said. Most of them moved away. And later? Later what? Later in your life. Another pause. I kept fewer people close. Why? Elias exhaled slowly through his nose. Because eventually people notice when someone spends more energy adapting than existing. Clara felt the sentence physically. A strange pressure beneath her ribs. Who noticed? She asked. He looked ahead toward the river. A woman I lived with once. The words startled Clara, though they shouldn't have. Of course there had been someone before her. Elias was in his 30s. A life existed before this. Still, hearing it aloud changed the air slightly. You lived with someone? Yes. For how long? 3 years. Clara waited. He did not continue. What was her name? She asked softly. The silence that followed was unlike his others. Not careful. Not thoughtful. Closed. Finally he said, I'd rather not say. Clara slowed slightly. Why? I don't want to turn her into a story. The answer sounded real. But incomplete again. What happened between you? Elias stopped walking. They stood beneath a street lamp near the river path. Mist moved faintly through the light around them. She told me she never knew whether she was loved, he said quietly, or simply understood too well. Clara felt cold move through her. Not fear. Recognition. Elias continued looking at the river instead of her. She said being with me sometimes felt like talking to someone who had already read ahead emotionally. The sentence settled into Clara's chest with frightening accuracy. Because she understood exactly what the woman had meant. And was she wrong? Clara asked carefully. A long pause. No, Elias said. The honesty of it hurt. Not because it was cruel. Because it wasn't. Because he knew. He had known all along. Rain gathered lightly on Clara's coat sleeves. Did you love her? She asked. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Yes. And I kept trying to become the version of myself that would make her feel safest. Clara looked at him steadily. That sounds loving. It sounds loving, he repeated softly. The difference between the two sentences hung there quietly. And it wasn't? Elias opened his eyes again. I think eventually she wanted to meet someone who wasn't already adjusting to her before she spoke. The river moved behind them in dark silence. Clara understood suddenly that this was the thing he never said directly. Not that he was afraid of hurting people. Not that he was careful. Not even that he adapted too much. The deeper truth underneath all of it. He did not know where his attention to others ended and his actual self began. And perhaps he never had. They resumed walking slowly. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The rain softened further until it became only moisture suspended in the air. Finally Clara asked, what happened after she left? Elias smiled faintly, but sadly. You hear how quickly you assume she left? Clara blinked. I'm sorry. No, he said gently. You're probably right. Probably? I ended it first. That surprised her. Why? Because I realized she had started watching me the way you do now. Clara felt herself go still. What way? As if she was trying to locate the point where my responses stopped being genuine. The words entered her quietly and stayed there. And did she? Elias was silent for so long Clara thought he might not answer. Then. I don't know if there is one. They reached Clara's building not long after. The old cinema sign flickered faintly at the end of the street, blue light appearing and disappearing through the mist. They stopped beneath the entrance lamp. Neither moved closer. I've told you more tonight than I meant to, Elias said quietly. I know. Does it make things worse? Clara looked at him carefully. His face looked tired again. Not dramatically sad. Just worn at the edges, as though holding himself together required constant low effort. "No," she said honestly. "But it makes things clearer." "Clearer how?" She searched for the answer. Not the graceful answer. The true one. "I think," she said slowly, "you learn to survive by becoming emotionally fluent." Elias watched her silently. "And now," she continued, "you don't always know when you're speaking naturally and when you're translating yourself into what feels safest." He lowered his gaze slightly. "Yes," he said. The simplicity of the agreement hurt more than explanation would have. Clara felt suddenly protective of him in a way she didn't entirely trust. Because now she could see the shape beneath the mystery. A child learning rooms too carefully. A man becoming expert at emotional calibration. Someone who answered perfectly not because he wanted control, but because uncertainty once felt dangerous. And yet, even understanding him did not fully remove the unease. Because the pattern remained. Even now, standing beneath the soft blue flicker of the old cinema sign, Clara could feel him listening ahead of the moment, adjusting himself in tiny invisible ways. Not deceptively. Automatically. As naturally as breathing. "I don't want to become another person studying you," she said quietly. Elias looked at her then with an expression so unguarded it almost startled her. "I know," he said. No polished sentence followed. No observation. No emotional precision. Just those words. "I know." For a brief moment, Clara felt something settle between them that resembled realness. Not perfect understanding. Not smoothness. Just two tired people standing in cold mist beneath weak city light, trying to speak without rearranging themselves first. And somehow that moment frightened her more than all the others. Because it made her realize she was beginning to love him. Not despite what he withheld. Not despite the strange carefulness. But directly through it. Through the silences. Through the unfinished edges. Through the quiet sadness of a man who had spent so long becoming what others needed that he no longer trusted whatever remained underneath. Elias stepped back slightly. "I should let you sleep." Clara nodded. "Yes." But neither of them moved immediately. The mist gathered softly around the streetlights. Finally Elias said, very quietly, "I'm trying not to disappear while I'm with you." Clara felt her chest tighten. That sentence. Not elegant. Not refined. Not carefully shaped. Just true enough to ache. She stepped closer before she fully decided to. Then she kissed him. Softly. Briefly. His breath caught with visible surprise. Not performed surprise. Real surprise. When she stepped back, Elias looked at her as though the world had shifted half an inch unexpectedly. And for the first time since she had known him, Clara saw him without adjustment. No perfect response arrived. No graceful line. No emotional calibration. Only silence. Only warmth. Only a man standing in cold November mist, looking suddenly uncertain in the most human way she had ever seen. And that, more than anything else, made her afraid. Chapter 8, Trying to Understand. After she kissed him, something between them became quieter. Not simpler. Clara had expected either relief or complication. Instead, what arrived was a strange stillness, as if both of them had stepped into a room where sound behaved differently. The following days passed gently on the surface. They texted. They met once for coffee near the gallery. Elias walked her home one evening without touching her except for a brief hand against the middle of her back while crossing a crowded street. Everything remained soft. And yet Clara felt more aware of him than ever. Especially when he wasn't speaking. That surprised her. For weeks, she had focused on his words, the precision of them, the way they landed too perfectly, the care with which he shaped emotional space. But after the kiss beneath the mist and flickering cinema light, she began noticing another version of him. The one that existed before language arrived. The slight tension in his shoulders when entering unfamiliar places. The way he observed rooms automatically, locating exits, empty tables, quiet corners. The tiny pauses before physical closeness, as if part of him still expected contact to require permission even after it had already been given. And most of all, the exhaustion. Not dramatic exhaustion. Nothing visible enough that another person would immediately notice it. But Clara noticed now because she had begun looking beneath the polished surface instead of only at it. There were moments when Elias seemed briefly absent inside himself, like someone listening to distant sound through a wall. Those moments unsettled her more than the carefulness ever had. Because they felt real. One Sunday afternoon, Clara invited him to her apartment for the first time. The invitation happened naturally. Or almost naturally. They had spent the morning walking through a small second-hand book market near the train station. The weather was cold but clear, sunlight sliding weakly across old stone buildings while vendors arranged stacks of worn novels beneath canvas awnings. Elias moved slowly through the market, touching books lightly before lifting them. Clara noticed he never opened them carelessly. He handled old paper the way some people handled photographs. At one table, he picked up a faded collection of poems and froze very slightly. "What?" Clara asked. He showed her the inside cover. A name written in blue ink. Marianne Vale. His mother. Clara looked at him. "You found one of hers?" Elias nodded once. His face remained calm, but something in him had gone distant. "Did she donate books here?" Clara asked gently. "I don't know." He kept holding the book without turning another page. Then, after a moment, he placed it back carefully. "You're leaving it?" Clara asked. "Yes." "Why?" Elias looked at the book for another second. "Because sometimes I think I've spent too long collecting echoes." The sentence stayed with Clara long after they left the market. By late afternoon, the cold had deepened enough that their breaths became visible. Clara stopped outside her building and looked up toward her apartment windows glowing faintly gold above the street. "I have soup," she said. Elias blinked slightly, as if returning from somewhere far away. "What?" "Upstairs," Clara said. "And bread. If you want to come in." For a brief moment, something uncertain crossed his face. Not reluctance. Almost caution. Then he nodded. "I'd like that." Inside, the apartment felt warmer than usual. Or perhaps Elias's presence altered the space simply by entering it. Clara noticed immediately how quietly he moved. He took off his coat carefully, folding it over the back of the chair instead of dropping it. He looked around the apartment only once, quickly, respectfully, without the visible curiosity most people showed inside someone else's home. Still, Clara watched him noticing things. The books stacked beside the sofa. The blue box partially visible beneath the bed through the half-open bedroom door. The dying tulips were placed now by eucalyptus branches in a glass jar near the window. "You changed the flowers," Elias said softly. "There's no such thing as a tulip surviving November." "There probably is somewhere." "Not emotionally." That made him smile faintly. Clara moved to the kitchen while he stood near the window. "I'm making lentil soup," she called. "In honor of Nora." "Then we should speak respectfully around it." She laughed quietly. The domesticity of the moment startled her. Not because it felt forced. Because it didn't. Elias standing by her window while soup warmed on the stove felt strangely natural, as though some version of this evening had existed long before either of them arrived inside it. And immediately after that thought came another one. Maybe that was the danger. Maybe Elias made everything feel inevitable too quickly. Clara stirred the soup slowly while watching his reflection in the darkened window. He had moved toward the bookshelf now, reading titles silently. "You organize them emotionally," he said after a moment. She turned. "What?" "Your books." "I do not." "You do." He glanced back at her, almost amused. "Poetry near the sofa. Essays beside the window. Novels closest to the bed." Clara frowned lightly. "That's coincidence." "No," Elias said gently. "It isn't." She looked closer. He was right. Without realizing it, she had arranged the apartment according to emotional function rather than category. "How did you notice that so fast?" she asked. The question came out more sharply than intended. Elias went still for half a second. Then quieter. "I notice environments automatically." Clara immediately regretted the tone. "I wasn't accusing you." "I know." But she heard it again. That tiny adjustment in him. As if her sharpness had caused some invisible recalibration. She served the soup before the moment could settle too deeply. They ate at the small kitchen table near the window. Rain had begun again outside. Not heavy, only soft enough to blur the streetlights into pale watercolor shapes. For a while, the evening moved gently. Elias told her about a recording he had spent 6 hours restoring only to discover the client preferred the damaged version because it sounded more honest. Clara described a woman at the gallery who had complained that abstract art made her feel personally excluded. "That's remarkable," Elias said. "What?" "The confidence required to believe abstraction is specifically about you." Clara laughed loudly enough to surprise herself. Elias looked momentarily startled too. Then he smiled. Not carefully. Not thoughtfully. Just suddenly. And Clara felt again that strange pull between comfort and unease. Because moments like this made him feel entirely real. Then other moments returned and blurred the edges again. Halfway through dinner, Clara stood to refill their water glasses. When she returned, Elias was looking at the framed photograph near the bookshelf. Her mother. The picture had been taken years ago beside the sea. Wind pulling her hair across her face while she laughed at something outside the frame. "She looks kind," Elias said softly. Clara sat down slowly. She was. Elias studied the photograph quietly. "You have her expression when you're trying not to cry." The words entered the room gently. Too gently. Clara felt herself freeze slightly. "What?" Elias looked at her immediately, realizing something had shifted. "I'm sorry," he said. That sounded intrusive. No, Clara said slowly. It just. She looked at the photograph. How would you know that? A pause. You did it once, he said quietly. Outside the gallery. When? When you were talking about the visitor who cried in front of abstract paintings. Clara searched her memory. The conversation had happened weeks ago. She vaguely remembered laughing during it. Smiling maybe. But crying? No. I wasn't crying, she said. No, Elias agreed gently. You were trying not to. The certainty in his voice unsettled her. Not because he was necessarily wrong. Because he had seen something she herself hadn't fully noticed. Clara sat very still. Rain whispered softly against the windows. I don't know how you do that, she said finally. Elias lowered his gaze. Neither do I. The answer should have eased her. Instead it deepened the feeling. Because he meant it. He truly did not seem to know where observation ended and interpretation began. The rest of dinner passed more quietly. Not badly. Only thoughtfully. Afterward, Elias helped wash dishes despite Clara insisting he didn't need to. She noticed he rolled his sleeves with exact symmetry. He rinsed plates before placing them beside her automatically, anticipating movement before she made it. Watching him in her kitchen felt strangely intimate and strangely sad. Like seeing someone who had spent years learning how not to inconvenience the world. When the dishes were finished, they moved to the sofa. The apartment lights were low now. Only the lamp beside the bookshelf remained on, casting soft gold across the room. Elias leaned back carefully, one arm resting along the edge of the sofa but not touching her. Too aware. Always too aware. You can relax, Clara said quietly. His eyes shifted toward her. I am relaxed. No, she said gently. You're arranged. The words settled softly between them. Elias looked down. After a long moment he admitted, I don't know the difference sometimes. Clara curled one leg beneath herself. I keep trying to understand you, she said. That sounds exhausting. It is a little. I'm sorry. There, Clara said softly. Elias blinked. You apologize whenever someone experiences difficulty around you. A faint line appeared between his brows. I suppose I do. Why? The answer came immediately. Because I usually caused it. And there it was again. A sentence so direct it almost hurt. Clara watched him carefully. You really believe that? Elias didn't answer. Which was answer enough. Outside, a car passed slowly through rainwater. Light moved across the ceiling briefly, then disappeared. Clara leaned her head back against the sofa. Can I ask you something difficult? Yes. Do you know what you want from people? Elias became very still. The question lingered longer than the others had. Finally he said, that depends. On what? Whether I'm answering honestly or correctly. The sentence moved through Clara like cold water. Because for the first time he had separated the two things himself. Honestly. Correctly. Not always the same. What's the difference? She asked quietly. Elias stared at his hands. The correct answer is that I want connection. Stability. Understanding. And the honest answer? A very long silence followed. So long Clara thought he might refuse. Then finally, I want relief. The room seemed to narrow softly around the words. Relief from what? Monitoring everything. His voice had gone quieter now, lower than usual. Most of the time, he continued slowly, being around people feels like listening to several emotional frequencies at once. I notice changes constantly. Tone. Distance. Silence. Discomfort. I'm always adjusting to them before I fully realize I'm doing it. Clara listened without interrupting. And when someone feels safe, he said, there's relief in that. Because I can stop listening so hard for a while. His eyes lifted toward hers then. You feel safe to me. The sentence should have sounded romantic. Instead it sounded devastatingly sincere. Clara felt tears press suddenly behind her eyes. Not because she felt manipulated. Because she understood him. And understanding him was becoming dangerous. Elias, she whispered, that sounds lonely. He smiled faintly. Yes. Silence settled around them again. But now it felt different. Not tense. Heavy in a quieter way. As if the room itself had absorbed something fragile. After a while Clara asked softly, what happens when you're angry? The question surprised him visibly. Angry? Yes. You never seem angry. Elias looked genuinely uncertain. I don't know. That can't be true. I mean, he paused. I rarely feel anger clearly. What do you feel instead? Another pause. Pressure, he said finally. In what way? Like I've failed to prevent something. Clara stared at him. That isn't the same thing. I know. Again that phrase. I know. But now she heard exhaustion beneath it. Not patience. Not polish. Simply exhaustion. The rain deepened outside. The apartment grew warmer. At some point Clara realized Elias had still not touched her since arriving except accidentally while passing plates in the kitchen. Not avoidance exactly. More like restraint carried so deeply it had become instinct. She shifted slightly closer to him on the sofa. Immediately his body stilled. Too aware again. Clara reached for his hand herself. His fingers tightened reflexively around hers, not strongly, just enough to reveal surprise. You don't have to ask permission to exist here, she said quietly. Something changed in his face then. Not visibly dramatic. But real enough that Clara felt it. A brief crack in the carefulness. Elias looked away toward the rain-dark window. My mother used to say that, he murmured. What? That I behaved like a guest everywhere. The sadness in his voice was so unguarded that Clara's chest ached. And were you? Yes, he said softly. Even at home. They sat in silence after that. Their hands remained loosely intertwined. The apartment hummed quietly around them, the radiator clicking softly, rain against glass, distant traffic moving through wet streets. Clara studied him carefully in the low light. She could see now that the mystery she had been trying to solve was changing shape again. At first she thought Elias might be hiding something. Then she thought he might be performing kindness too perfectly. But now it felt more complicated. As though he had spent so many years constructing emotional safety around other people that he no longer trusted whatever existed underneath the construction. And perhaps there was no hidden self waiting beneath it. Perhaps the carefulness itself had become him. The thought frightened her unexpectedly. Because if that was true, how could anyone love him without constantly searching for someone more authentic behind the surface? And how cruel would that search become? As if sensing the direction of her thoughts, Elias spoke quietly into the dim room. "You're trying to understand whether I'm real." Clara's breath caught slightly. She looked at him. He wasn't accusing her. He sounded tired. "I'm trying to understand you," she corrected softly. Elias nodded once. That too. The honesty of it unsettled her because it removed the possibility of pretending otherwise. He knew. Of course he knew. "You make that difficult sometimes," she admitted. "I know. And you notice too much." "Yes. And sometimes it feels like you're shaping yourself before I can reach you." A long silence followed. Then Elias said something so quietly she almost missed it. "I think I learned to arrive already translated." Clara closed her eyes briefly. There it was. The thing underneath everything else. Not manipulation. Not deception. Translation. A person converting themselves continuously into the version least likely to create pain. When she opened her eyes again, Elias was watching the rain. Not her. Not the room. Just the rain moving slowly down the window. And suddenly Clara understood something that made her heart ache with terrifying tenderness. He wasn't trying to control how people saw him. He was trying to survive being seen at all. The realization softened something inside her even as it deepened the uncertainty. Because now she understood why he felt unreal sometimes. Not because he lacked genuine emotion. Because genuine emotion reached her only after passing through years of careful editing. Like one of his recordings. Static removed. Sharpness softened. Damage repaired. Until the voice remained clear. But no longer entirely untouched. Very late that night, after Elias had left and the apartment returned to silence, Clara stood alone by the window. Rain still moved softly through the streetlights outside. The eucalyptus branches near the glass shifted slightly whenever the radiator clicked on. She thought about his words. "I think I learned to arrive already translated." And for the first time since meeting him, Clara stopped asking herself whether Elias was hiding something. Instead, she asked a quieter, more difficult question. If someone spends long enough translating themselves for others, what happens to the original language underneath? Chapter 9: The Quiet Truth. After that evening in her apartment, Clara stopped trying to solve Elias. The change was subtle. No decision announced itself clearly inside her. She did not wake one morning with sudden understanding or relief. The questions remained. The unease remained too, though softer now, less sharp at the edges. But something important had shifted. She no longer felt like she was searching for evidence. Instead, she began paying attention differently. Not to catch him. Not to expose some hidden contradiction. Only to see him as fully as possible. And once she allowed herself to do that, she noticed how tired he really was. Not physically. Though sometimes there were shadows beneath his eyes, and moments when he rubbed absent-mindedly at the bridge of his nose while listening to her speak. But the deeper exhaustion lived elsewhere. It revealed itself in small things. The relief in him when conversations became simple. The almost invisible tension before entering crowded places. The way silence sometimes settled over him, not like comfort, but like recovery. Clara began to understand that Elias experienced other people almost continuously. Not in a mystical sense. Not magically. Just attentively. Too attentively. And now that she understood that, she could also see the cost. One Friday evening, nearly 2 weeks after he first came to her apartment, they traveled outside the city together. Not far. Only an hour by train to a coastal town Clara had loved since childhood. In summer, tourists filled the narrow streets and crowded the harbor cafes. But in November, the town became quiet enough to hear gulls over the water again. The trip had been her idea. You need weather that belongs to somewhere else, she had told him. Elias had smiled faintly. That sounds medically invented. It probably is. Still, he agreed immediately. Now they sat side by side on the train while fields passed outside in long gray-green stretches beneath a cloud-heavy sky. The carriage was warm and mostly empty. A man slept 2 rows ahead with a newspaper folded across his chest. Somewhere farther back, someone coughed softly every few minutes. Clara watched Elias looking out the window. Not distracted. Not withdrawn. Only quiet. You used to travel here often, he asked after a while. With my mother, Clara said. Elias nodded gently. What did she like about it? The sea in winter. That feels specific. She said summer water belonged to everyone, Clara replied. But winter water belonged only to people willing to sit beside it. Elias smiled softly at that. That sounds like her. Clara turned toward him. You've never met her. No, he said. But I know the kind of sentence people carry from someone they loved. The observation should have unsettled her. Instead, it made her chest ache quietly. Because he was right. Some people remained alive through the shape of their language inside others. When they arrived, the town looked almost asleep beneath the gray afternoon sky. Fishing boats moved gently in the harbor. Wind carried the scent of salt and rain through the narrow streets. They walked without direction at first. Clara showed him the bookstore where her mother used to buy postcards she never sent. The bakery that survived every winter despite looking permanently closed. The seawall where she had once dropped an entire bag of cherries into the tide at age 11 and cried as though she had lost something irreplaceable. Elias listened carefully, but not intensely the way he sometimes did in the city. Here, near the water, he seemed slightly less compressed somehow. As if the open air gave his thoughts more room. Eventually they reached the shoreline. The sea stretched dark and calm beneath the clouds, moving in slow silver patterns against the rocks. No one else stood nearby. Clara sat on the seawall and pulled her coat tighter against the wind. Elias sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence felt natural. Not empty. Not waiting. Just shared. Clara realized suddenly that this might be the quietest she had ever seen him. Not silent externally. Internally. No visible adjustments. No careful emotional guidance. Only stillness. You're calmer here, she said softly. Elias looked out toward the horizon. Yes. Why? Another small pause. The sea doesn't require interpretation. The answer made her smile faintly. That sounds like something from the back of a book again. It probably is. But this time, he sounded amused by himself rather than polished. Wind moved through his hair. For several minutes they watched the water without speaking again. Then Clara asked quietly, "What was your mother like when no one else was around?" Elias's expression changed slightly. Not guarded. Remembering. She sang while making tea, he said after a moment. Clara smiled softly. What kind of songs? Old folk songs mostly. Sometimes half-finished melodies she invented herself and forgot immediately afterward. That sounds nice. It was. The word held warmth. Real warmth. Clara waited. She loved difficult novels and overwatered plants, he continued quietly. She kept buying notebooks she never used because she believed the next one might finally become important enough to write in. Clara laughed softly. My mother did that too. Elias looked at her then with visible surprise. Really? Yes. She called them possibility notebooks. For the first time all afternoon, Elias laughed fully. Not loudly, but openly enough that Clara felt something loosen inside her. That's exactly the kind of thing your mother would say, he murmured. You've decided she belongs to a literary movement. She does. The ease between them settled warmly for a while after that. Then, very softly, Clara asked the question she had been circling for weeks. What about your father? The wind moved sharply across the water. Elias's smile faded slowly. Not abruptly. Only gently, like light dimming in a room. He's alive, Elias said after a moment. The answer startled Clara slightly. Not because she assumed otherwise, but because Elias had spoken about him with such distance that she had unconsciously imagined absence. Do you see him? She asked. No. How long has it been? Another pause. 8 years. Clara looked at him carefully. That's a long time. Yes. What happened? Elias bent slightly forward, elbows resting against his knees. For several seconds, he said nothing at all. The sea moved softly below them. Finally. My father believed emotions were negotiations. The sentence settled strangely in the cold air. What does that mean? He thought every emotional expression was trying to achieve something. Clara frowned slightly. Even sadness? Especially sadness. The quiet certainty in Elias's voice made her chest tighten. He believed vulnerability was a form of control, Elias continued. And attentiveness was manipulation. Clara thought of the word he had used earlier. Manipulation. The accusation his father placed on his carefulness. And your mother disagreed, she said quietly. Yes. Were they unhappy together? A long silence followed. Then Elias said something so softly Clara almost missed it. I think they spent years trying to survive each other's interpretations. The sadness in the sentence lingered heavily between them. Clara looked at his hands resting loosely together. Suddenly she could see it more clearly than before. A child raised between two opposing understandings of emotion. One parent believing feelings should be translated carefully. The other believing translation itself was dishonesty. No wonder Elias no longer knew what was genuine inside himself. What happened after your mother died? Clara asked gently. Elias stared out toward the water. My father told me grief was self-indulgent if extended too long. The words entered the cold air quietly. Too quietly. Clara felt something painful move through her chest. And you believed him? For a while. Elias smiled faintly then, but without warmth. I became very efficient at appearing functional. The sentence hurt because Clara already knew it was true. She had met that version of him first. The composed man in the bookshop. The careful voice. The perfect responses. A person edited into emotional readability. "Did you ever tell him how angry you were?" she asked. Elias looked genuinely puzzled. "I wasn't angry." Elias. "No," he said quietly. "I was relieved." The confession startled her. He saw it immediately. "That sounds terrible." "No," Clara said softly. "It sounds human." Elias looked down at his hands again. "When my mother died," he said slowly, "the entire emotional structure of the house disappeared. There was no one left translating between us. Wind moved sharply across the seawall. And without her," he continued, "everything became very clear very quickly." Clara understood then. Not every detail. Not every history. But the shape. The quiet truth beneath everything else. Elias had not become emotionally careful because he wanted control. He had become emotionally careful because he had grown up watching emotional misunderstanding destroy intimacy slowly from the inside. He was trying to prevent catastrophe before it formed. Always. Constantly. Even now. Especially now. And suddenly Clara saw the deeper sadness underneath his behavior. He did not trust unshaped emotion to survive contact with another person. They walked through the town again as evening approached. Lights began appearing behind windows. Restaurants opened quietly along the harbor. Somewhere nearby, dishes clattered softly inside a kitchen. The sky darkened into deep blue-gray. Elias seemed quieter after speaking about his father, but not withdrawn. If anything, he looked slightly lighter, as though saying the words aloud had removed pressure from somewhere invisible. At one point they stopped inside a small bookstore near the harbor. The shop smelled of paper and sea salt. Lamps glowed warmly above uneven shelves. Clara wandered toward the poetry section while Elias disappeared somewhere deeper in the store. A few minutes later, she found him standing motionless near a display table. "What is it?" she asked softly. He looked up slowly. In his hands was a thin book of essays. The author photograph on the back cover showed a woman with dark hair and tired, intelligent eyes. Elias's mother. Clara felt her breath catch slightly. "She published something," she whispered. "One book," Elias said. His voice sounded distant. "She never told me it was still in print." Clara stepped closer. The title read, "Rooms That Listen." She looked at him carefully. "Will you buy it?" Elias stared at the cover for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, "No." "Why?" His fingers tightened slightly around the book. "Because I think I've spent most of my life trying to remain inside her voice." The sentence settled deeply between them. Clara understood immediately what he meant. His carefulness. His translation of emotion. His attentiveness. Even the language he used sometimes, it all carried traces of someone who believed words could prevent pain if arranged correctly enough. "You loved her very much," Clara said softly. "Yes." "And you became like her." A pause. "Yes." They stood silently among the bookshelves while soft music played somewhere near the register. Then Clara asked quietly, "Do you ever worry there's nothing underneath all the adjusting?" Elias looked at her directly. The question should have sounded cruel. Instead it sounded frightened. Because it was. His expression softened immediately. "All the time," he admitted. The honesty of it nearly broke her heart. All the time, he repeated more quietly. I keep thinking if I stop anticipating people correctly enough, they'll discover there's no stable version of me underneath it. Clara felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes. Because there it was. The quiet truth. Not hidden manipulation. Not calculated performance. Fear. A deep, exhausting fear that without constant emotional calibration, he might disappear entirely inside other people's disappointment. Clara reached for his hand without thinking. His fingers closed around hers instantly, almost reflexively. You're here, she said softly. Elias looked at her with an expression so unguarded it frightened her slightly. I don't always feel like I am. The bookstore suddenly seemed very small around them. Warm lamps. Sea-scented paper. Rain beginning softly outside again. And two people standing quietly in the center of it, trying to understand whether love could survive this kind of uncertainty. Later that night, after dinner in a nearly empty harbor restaurant, they walked back toward the station through misty streets. The town had grown silent. Windows glowed softly above narrow lanes. Water moved gently against the docks. Somewhere a radio played faintly through an open kitchen window. Clara felt strangely peaceful. And deeply sad. Not hopeless. Just aware. Aware that understanding someone did not necessarily solve the ache of them. As they waited for the train home, Elias stood beside her on the platform with his hands deep in his coat pockets. Thank you for bringing me here, he said quietly. I'm glad you came. A pause. Then. I think this is the longest I've gone without trying to manage how someone sees me. Clara looked at him carefully. That sounds exhausting too. He smiled faintly. It is. The train lights appeared far down the tracks. Cold air moved around them. And suddenly Clara understood something she had been resisting for weeks. Elias was not mysterious because he was hiding darkness. He was mysterious because he had spent so long adapting himself to emotional survival that even he no longer fully knew what remained unadapted. The realization should have reassured her completely. Instead, it made her quietly afraid. Because loving him now meant loving someone who genuinely could not separate performance from instinct anymore. Not falsely. Not deliberately. But completely. And Clara didn't yet know whether intimacy could survive that kind of uncertainty. As the train approached through the mist, Elias glanced toward her. What are you thinking? The old version of him might have already guessed. Might have offered a careful interpretation before she answered. But tonight he only asked. And waited. Clara looked at the dark tracks stretching ahead of them. Then back at him. I think, she said slowly, you spent your whole life learning how not to become a burden. Elias went very still. And now, she continued quietly, you don't know how to let someone love you without first making yourself easy to love. The train arrived behind them in a rush of sound and light. But for a brief moment before the doors opened, Elias looked at her with complete stillness. No adjustment. No polished response. Only truth. And in that expression Clara finally saw the quietest, deepest thing he had never known how to say aloud. He did not fear being abandoned. He feared being fully known. And still not enough. Chapter 10, What She Realized. Winter arrived quietly after the trip to the coast. Not through snow at first, but through light. The city mornings became silver and slow, as though dawn itself no longer hurried to arrive. Windows fogged from the inside. Breath appeared briefly in the air before disappearing again. People walked with their hands buried deeper into pockets, carrying warmth carefully from one building to the next. And through all of it, Clara kept thinking about the platform. About the way Elias had looked at her after she told him he didn't know how to let someone love him without first making himself easy to love. No perfect sentence had followed. No careful response. Only silence. Only truth. That expression remained with her more vividly than almost anything else since meeting him. Because for the first time, she had seen him without translation. And now she understood why it had frightened her. Not because it looked dangerous. Because it looked unbearably human. December settled over the city in soft gray layers. Clara and Elias continued seeing each other, though the shape of their relationship became quieter after the coast. Less like something beginning. More like something slowly unfolding inward. They no longer texted constantly. The silences between messages grew longer and more natural. Sometimes an entire morning passed without contact, and neither of them apologized for it afterward. That change relieved Clara. Not because she wanted distance. Because the connection had started to breathe differently. More honestly. Sometimes Elias still answered too carefully. Sometimes he still shaped conversations before they fully arrived. But now Clara could see the effort happening inside him instead of mistaking it for smoothness. And strangely, once she could see the effort, the unreality softened. One evening near Christmas, Clara stopped by his studio unexpectedly after work. She had not warned him she was coming. That mattered more than she expected. Because Elias always seemed emotionally prepared for people. Even spontaneity somehow appeared anticipated around him. Clara wanted, just once, to arrive before he arranged himself. The hallway smelled faintly of dust and radiator heat. The fern outside his door had grown wider since autumn. Its small white tag still read Clara in faded print. She stood there for a moment before knocking. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Elias looked genuinely startled. Not performatively startled. Actually startled. His hair was untidy. His sweater sleeve was rolled unevenly. Reading glasses rested low against his nose. Behind him, the studio looked less arranged than usual. Papers spread across the desk. A half-finished cup of tea beside the sound equipment. One lamp still off. For half a second, neither of them spoke. Then Elias blinked and smiled slowly. Clara. Something inside her softened instantly. You weren't expecting me. No, he admitted. The answer came without adjustment. Without, but I'm glad you're here. Without smoothing the surprise into immediate emotional correctness. Just no. And somehow that felt more intimate than any perfect greeting could have. Can I come in? She asked. You never have to ask that. The sentence arrived naturally this time. Unshaped. Clara stepped inside. The studio felt different in this state. Less curated. More lived in. More him. I interrupted your work, she said. A little. Again, honest. She smiled faintly. What are you restoring? Elias glanced toward the desk. A recording of two brothers arguing over a chess game in 1987. That sounds strangely specific. It becomes emotional very quickly. Clara laughed softly and removed her coat. Elias took it automatically, then stopped halfway through hanging it up. "What?" she asked. He looked faintly embarrassed. "I almost asked whether you wanted tea before realizing I hadn't even said hello properly. And I'm trying not to perform hospitality like a reflex." The self-awareness in his voice carried both humor and exhaustion. Clara stepped closer. "You know," she said gently, "most people don't analyze themselves this much." "I know. But you do." "Yes." "Why?" Elias looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because if I stop paying attention, I'm afraid I'll become careless with people." The sadness in the sentence settled softly between them. Clara touched his wrist lightly. "You're allowed to exist imperfectly around me." He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm trying to believe that." They spent the evening quietly. Elias played sections of the chess recording for her. Two boys arguing intensely about rules while someone in the background washed dishes and laughed occasionally at their seriousness. "It's strange," Clara said while listening through the headphones. "The argument sounds comforting." "It does." "Why?" Elias adjusted one of the controls slightly. "Because they know they're loved while they're disagreeing." The answer entered Clara slowly. She looked at him. "And you didn't?" A pause. "No," he said quietly. There it was again. The quiet truth beneath everything else. Not dramatic trauma. Not cruelty. Only emotional uncertainty stretched over years until attentiveness became survival. Later, they sat on the floor beside the desk eating takeout soup from paper containers because neither of them wanted to leave the warmth of the studio. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Elias leaned back against the cabinet behind him, looking tired in a peaceful way Clara had not seen before. Not collapsed. Resting. "You're different lately," she said softly. He looked toward her. "How?" "You stop yourself less." A faint smile touched his face. "That sounds dangerous." "It sounds quieter." Elias considered that. Then nodded once. "I think I'm becoming less afraid of disappointing you." The honesty of it startled her. "Were you afraid of that?" "Yes." "Why?" He let out a small breath. "Because you see me clearly enough to know when I'm translating myself." Clara sat very still. "And that scared you?" "Yes." "Why?" Elias looked down at the soup container in his hands. "Because if someone notices the translation," he said quietly, "eventually they start searching for the original version underneath." The words landed softly and heavily at once. "And you thought I would too?" "I thought everyone eventually does." Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she asked the question that had been quietly waiting inside her for weeks. "And is there one?" Elias lifted his eyes slowly. "The original version?" "Yes." Silence filled the warm studio. Not tense. Only careful. Finally Elias said, very softly, "I don't think people are singular enough for that." Clara felt something inside her settle. Not completely. But deeply. Elias continued speaking slowly, as if discovering the thought while saying it. "I think we become shaped by what we survive. By what we fear. By who teaches us how to be loved." He looked down briefly. "I spent so long believing attentiveness was the only safe form of closeness that eventually it stopped feeling separate from me." Clara listened quietly. "And maybe that means some parts of me are practiced," he said. But practice doesn't always mean false. The room became very still after that. Because there it was. The thing Clara had been trying to understand since the beginning. Not whether Elias was real, but whether carefulness erased authenticity. And suddenly, sitting there on the studio floor while rain softened the windows and old voices waited silently inside labeled tapes around them, Clara realized something simple and enormous. It didn't. At least not entirely. People practiced themselves constantly. Some practiced confidence. Some practiced distance. Some practiced humor so carefully that no one noticed the loneliness beneath it. Others practiced calmness, politeness, charm, intelligence. Most people arrived in relationships partly translated already. Elias had simply become more conscious of it than anyone she had ever met. And because he was conscious of it, he feared it. Feared that every thoughtful response might secretly be performance. Every kindness might be adaptation. Every tenderness might somehow be artificial because it had been learned carefully instead of appearing effortlessly. But Clara understood now that effort itself was not dishonesty. Sometimes effort was love. Sometimes attentiveness was love. Sometimes learning how not to hurt people was love too. Not always. But often. The realization moved through her slowly, warming places that had felt uncertain for months. She looked at Elias differently then. Not as a mystery to solve. Not as a man hiding behind perfect responses. Just as a person who had spent years listening too hard for danger and was only now beginning to understand that intimacy could survive imperfection. Maybe even require it. You know what I think, she said quietly. Elias looked toward her. I think you spent so long worrying about becoming manipulative that you forgot sincerity can also be intentional. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? I mean, Clara searched for the words carefully. You act as though your attentiveness becomes less real because you think about it consciously. Elias stayed very still. But love is conscious sometimes, she continued softly. Kindness is conscious. Paying attention is conscious. That doesn't make it fake. The rain deepened briefly against the windows. Clara could see emotion moving behind his eyes now, not neatly arranged emotion. Not translated. Something rougher. You really believe that, he said quietly. Yes. A long silence followed. Then Elias asked something so softly she almost didn't hear it. Even when it feels rehearsed? Clara felt tears rise unexpectedly. Because there it was. The deepest fear underneath everything else. Not abandonment. Not rejection. Artificiality. The terror that his carefulness made him fundamentally unreal. Clara moved closer to him across the floor until their knees touched lightly. Elias, she said gently, do you know what never felt rehearsed? He looked at her silently. The way you listen to damaged recordings. Confusion flickered briefly across his face. What? You never try to make them perfect, she said. You preserve the breathing. The pauses. The room around the voice. Her own voice softened. You understand instinctively that removing all the roughness removes the person too. The studio became completely still. Clara touched his hand lightly. You've been trying to edit yourself the same way your whole life, she whispered. But people aren't meant to sound flawless. Elias closed his eyes suddenly. And to Clara's quiet shock, tears appeared beneath them almost immediately. Not dramatic crying. Not collapse. only exhaustion finally loosening enough to become visible. He laughed once under his breath, embarrassed. I didn't realize I was this tired. Clara's chest ached. I think you've been tired for a very long time. Elias nodded slightly without opening his eyes. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Rain. Radiator clicks. Distant traffic below the building. And somewhere inside the studio equipment, the faint electrical hum of preserved voices waiting patiently in darkness. Finally Elias spoke again, voice rougher now. My mother used to say people reveal themselves most honestly in what they try hardest to hide. Clara smiled faintly. She sounds difficult. She was. And wise. Yes. He opened his eyes then and looked at Clara with an expression she had never seen before. Not polished. Not careful. Simply open. I think, he said slowly, I kept waiting for you to become disappointed once you understood me. Clara felt tears gathering in her own eyes now. I did become disappointed sometimes. A faint shadow crossed his expression. Then she added softly. But never because you weren't real. Something in him loosened visibly at those words. Not fixed. Not healed. Only loosened. And Clara understood then that this was the quiet truth she had been moving toward since the rainy evening in the bookshop. Elias had never felt unreal because he lacked sincerity. He felt unreal because he had learned to mediate himself constantly before offering himself to other people. Like someone editing a recording while it was still being spoken. But beneath all the carefulness, all the precision, all the emotional fluency, there had always been a person there. Tired. Attentive. Lonely. Kind. Not perfectly. Just genuinely. The realization arrived without drama. Without revelation music or sudden certainty. Only calm understanding. Outside, rain continued falling softly through the December night. Inside the studio, old tapes rested quietly on shelves while two people sat together on the floor surrounded by preserved voices and unfinished silences. Elias reached for her hand slowly this time. Not cautiously. Not automatically. Just honestly. Clara held it. And for the first time since meeting him, she no longer felt like she was searching for the point where performance ended and reality began. Because she finally understood something simple. The way a person learns to survive is also part of who they are. You cannot remove it cleanly. You cannot strip away every adaptation and expect to uncover some untouched self waiting underneath. There is no untouched self. There is only the person shaped by love, fear, memory, grief, attention, longing. The person who arrives after all of it. And sometimes that person speaks carefully because carefulness once kept them safe. Sometimes they notice too much. Sometimes they answer too perfectly because they spent years believing misunderstanding could cost them intimacy. That didn't make Elias unreal. It made him human in a way Clara had almost overlooked because she was searching for something more pure than people actually are. Later, much later, after the rain softened and the city settled deeper into night, Clara stood by the studio window while Elias prepared tea behind her. The glass reflected them faintly. Not perfectly. Only enough. You know, Elias said quietly from across the room, I still think about the first thing you said to me. Clara turned slightly. In the bookshop? Yes. What was it? His smile appeared slowly. Were you hiding behind the shelf and pushing books at strangers? Clara laughed softly. That feels very far away now. It does. He carried the tea toward her. But I'm glad you asked. Why? Elias handed her the cup carefully. Then, after a small thoughtful pause, he said, because it was the first moment in a very long time that someone spoke to me before I had time to become easy. Clara looked at him quietly. The room glowed softly around them. Outside, the city moved through rain and winter and ordinary human loneliness. Inside, Elias stood before her exactly as he was, still attentive, still thoughtful, still occasionally too careful. Not transformed into simplicity. Not cured into spontaneity. Just more visible now. And somehow, finally, real. The tea warmed Clara's hands. Somewhere behind them, among shelves of preserved voices and remembered rooms, an old tape machine clicked softly as it settled deeper into silence. And for the first time since she had met him, nothing about the quiet felt rehearsed. The end.